Welcome to this afternoon's meeting of Dundee City Council's Scrutiny Committee. This is being held remotely in terms of Section 43 of the Local Governments in Scotland Act 2003. All members in attendance are able to fully participate in the meeting, which is being recorded. Should any member need to leave the meeting for any reason, can they please use the chat to advise of this? If a member loses their connection, they should make every effort to rejoin the meeting, but if this is not possible, the Committee Services Officer will note their absence for the remainder of the meeting. If you have to leave the meeting due to a declaration of interest, you must remain out of the meeting until invited back in. Would all members please mute their microphones when not speaking to avoid background noise and turn off any smart speakers. Please start the meeting with your camera on. Your face will then appear on the screen when you are speaking. If your connection is poor, you may wish to turn off your camera and see if this improves matters. If this doesn't help, you may wish to join the meeting, leave the meeting and then rejoin. If you wish to raise a point of order, ask a question, speak on any item or move a motion or amendment, please use the chat when the item is called. The convener will then invite you to speak. Would members of the press and public in attendance please not post messages in the chat. Where items are for noting, or where there has been no disagreement expressed, the convener will call for any member who has a contrary view to indicate this through the chat, otherwise the item will be agreed. Please would members not use the chat for any other purposes, as those joining the meeting by telephone cannot see the chat and therefore will not be able to follow the debate. Although we are operating in a different way, this is still a formal meeting of the committee, and the class standards of behaviour and discussion are the same as in a face-to-face meeting. Standing orders will apply to the proceedings, and the terms of the Councillors' Code of Conduct will also apply in the normal way. Does any member have any questions regarding this procedure? There are no questions, convener, so I will now ask the Committee Services Officer to take a roll call and any declarations of interest for the minute. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Convener.
Present.
Councillor McCready. Councillor McCready. Billy McPherson.
I'm present. Good afternoon.
Billy Salt.
Yes.
Councillor Lynn.
Present.
Councillor Short.
Here.
Bailey Sawyers.
Yes, I'm here.
Councillor Cadell.
Present.
I'll go back. Councillor McCready.
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry. Apologies for being late.
Thank you. And can I ask, do any members present have any declarations of interest? There appears to be none, so I'll come back to the convener.
Okay. I believe we've got a few deputations for that. I think it's Olympia first. Call upon yourself then, Roger, to take me through the item or open with that item, then we'll take the deputations.
Yes, certainly, convener. With the committee's agreement, I'd be grateful if I could have the opportunity to make some introductory remarks before the formal business begins this afternoon.
That would be fine.
Thank you. So, as members will be aware, but for the information and benefit of any members of the press and public who are present this afternoon, scrutiny exists at many levels within the Council and involves both chief officers and elected members. Chief officers are responsible for scrutinising the operation of their services and taking action wherever they believe that services are not being provided in an appropriate way. The work of chief officers is in turn monitored by the conveners of the various committees and also by the Council's committees and subcommittees themselves. The Policy and Resources Committee clearly has the widest scrutiny role because its remit is widest, but the Council's other service committees also contribute to the work of scrutiny to some degree. The Scrutiny Committee is meant to strengthen these scrutiny arrangements and to add a further tier of scrutiny within the Council's arrangements. And in its order of reference, it contains two particular issues which are relevant to this afternoon's meeting. First of all, its remit is to scrutinise, review and examine reports and action plans relating to service delivery which are referred to the committee from the City Council, its committees and subcommittees, and to report back where necessary. One of the items of business this afternoon has been referred to the committee by a further council committee. The Scrutiny Committee also has a remit to consider any item which has first been submitted to and agreed by the Chief Executive in consultation with the convener, and the other item of business this afternoon falls to be considered for that reason. There are two formal items contained in 4 reports. The first item is roof tile fixings to domestic properties, and the second item is the Olympia maintenance programme. A deputation request has been received in relation to the Olympia maintenance programme, and I'll pass over to Mrs. Albrook, who will be able to indicate who the deputation are so the committee can consider whether they wish to hear the deputation. Mrs. Albrook.
Thank you. The deputation request is on behalf of Dundee City Aquatics, and the request is for 2 members to speak: David Haig, the head coach, and Stuart Maxwell, who is also a member of Dundee City Aquatics. Do you agree to hear the deputation?
Yes.
On that basis, convener, in terms of the council standing orders, it falls for item 2, the Olympia maintenance programme, which is reports 4 and 5 on the agenda, to be considered first.
Okay. Do you want to take any comment on that particular report, or should we just go straight to the deputations?
Can I suggest, convener, that we first of all invite the deputations to speak, and then once any questions have been asked and answered, I'd be grateful if I could make a brief introduction before the item is formally considered.
Okay, it's Mr. Haig and Mr. Maxwell. Just to let you know, you've got 7 minutes between you to make your deputation. Hopefully you can stick reasonably close to that. I won't be overly harsh, but it would be useful so that we can spend as much time scrutinising the committee papers as possible. And also, suggest that you stay around to take any questions that the committee may have for you. So if I could just allow you to speak, and perhaps you could tell me how you're going to use up the time of the meeting, just if it's yourself first, Mr. Maxwell, or Mr. Haig, whatever.
Convener, thanks for convener, elected members. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak this afternoon. It's much appreciated. David Haig will speak first. David is a head coach of Dundee City Aquatics, and I think you're well familiar with already through the press the impact the closure of the Olympia has had on swimming in Dundee. But I think it's important you get a reminder of that a few months on. David will start, and then I'll kind of finish. Much of what I would maybe be looking to cover has already been covered to some extent in your report and in today's courier. But my own background is I believe it or not, I do compete in swimming and master swimming and up to European medal standard. But I was also on the Leisure and Culture Trust, a trustee 2017 to 19, and was the lead trustee for the leisure and sport. So I've got a pretty intimate knowledge of the Olympia. So I'll maybe make some comment. So if I could ask David just to start. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, yes, good afternoon, and again, thank you for allowing us to attend. I will keep fairly brief and summarise the impact at a personal level it's had on Dundee City Aquatics in particular, but aquatics in general in Dundee and the Tayside area. Speaking firstly, I am the head coach. I've been the head coach seven and a half years at Dundee City Aquatics since I retired from the police. And all of that time I've also been the Scottish swimming convener for Midland District, which covers Angus, Python, Ross and Dundee. Anyway, dealing very briefly, as I will try with DC, our athletes train and compete at Novice District, National I'm going to say National Scotland and GB level and at international level. We're fortunate that we had a facility that facilitated that, primarily the long course session, and the loss of that has been crucial in swimmers achieving their goal, or their perception that they can achieve their goal in Dundee. I have 4 swimmers that are competing at an elite or nearly elite level, and at this point, a female 17-year-old swimmer who's been with us for 6 years, first time qualifying for the Scottish national team, has left because of the uncertainty and unreliability opportunity at Dundee. We've got a 15-year-old male swimmer who is in the Scottish national junior team, and if any of you have a passing awareness of Scotland's best swimmer, Duncan Scott, he reminds me of a young Duncan Scott. Unfortunately, he also has taken the decision to leave Dundee and train elsewhere. Arguably our best performer, Jack Milne, 20-year-old male para swimmer, is in the Scottish national team. He is already in the British para swimming world-class podium potential programme, and he's still with us, but in June he leaves to go to Aberdeen. It is too crucial in his swimming development to continue without facilities to achieve what he is. He'll be representing Aberdeen as hopefully he goes to the Paris Paralympics, which is a real disappointment. Not for Jack if he gets there, but a real disappointment for the club, for the district and Dundee in general. We are losing swimmers across all areas. Stuart spoke about the Masters section. We are losing swimmers from there because the alternates that have been able to eventually put in place just don't work. And at the junior level, we're finding that kids are just saying, nah, this is too much effort, we don't know when we're going to get a swim, and we'll go and do something else. It is a Am I still there?
Just seem to lost you there for the sound. Do you want to repeat that again?
Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yeah, you know, yes.
Yeah, we are in the process of losing a small generation of swimming athletes from Dundee because of the impact of the Olympia long-term closure. 2 further things as representing the district. Olympia is the main competition pool, and it's actually the only suitable competition pool in Dundee, and that's just taking the feet from the district. We're having to travel into Fife, which isn't too far away to Glenrothes, but we're having to travel up to Aberdeen to hold our competitions. It's really a real killer for the district, and financially it's a real drain on our athletes and our athletes' parents. Finally, I'll touch on our diving section. Now, to put you in the picture, diving is actually a booming sport at the moment, with Tom Daly and Grace Reid and other guys like that are winning Olympic medals. Dundee is one of 4 facilities in Scotland that provided diving opportunity, and Dundee City Aquatics is one of only 4 clubs in Dundee that train divers. Now, the level we're training at is very much a developmental level. They've lost everything. They were badly hit by the pandemic, which is not this committee's business, but this is a real whammy for them in that, albeit it's not my discipline, I have real concerns that we will lose this activity from Dundee altogether because we simply can't find a place for them to train and dive. So it is I won't take any more of your time. It's a big issue for the whole aquatics community because it was such an essential facility for everyone involved, and I speak for DCA, for Midland Districts. That's not taking into account the other swimming clubs and users that use it. Anyway, thank you for your time.
Right. Good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, David.
Very much, Rob.
I think you've got a sense of the impact here on. I mean, I'm obviously not from Dundee, but I lived here for 26 years. Dundee has always been known for high level competitive swimming, you know, to the highest standard. The closure of the Olympia has a major impact on that. I'm conscious of the time, so if I could just make one or two kind of key points. I think your 888-page report gives a fairly comprehensive picture of well, the area regarding the Olympia, particularly Appendix 10 sets out the fact that a lot of the issues which have been identified are not new, despite maybe the suggestion that the City Development Committee on the 6th of December. A lot of you have visited Olympia. You've seen the flooded boiler room. Some of you have been on sat on the trust. There's been ongoing issues in terms of the diving boards, the safety. The temporary safety barrier has been up for 5 years in that pool. We've had algae in the bottom of the pool. There's been no annual maintenance programme, no shutdown. My question would be, why not? These issues have been raised on a regular basis as identified by Appendix 10 in your report. Again, I would ask the question, why have these not been actioned? There were regular health and property site visits. Councillor Dawson was very active in that. We had the Paul Hackett report in year 4, which was a pretty clear assessment of repair works. I understand that there was a figure of about £1 million put against that. You're now looking at maybe sometimes 4 times that amount now. Why was that not acted on? I also had a look back through my own notes, and I came across an interesting email in August 2019 about £750,000, which had been made available and then embargoed. There was also within that email it seemed to suggest there was concerns about the line management structure within the property services and a breakdown in communication between leisure and culture and that service. The punchline for me is the current situation could and should have been avoided. From your perspective, there's clearly financial implications, there's the impact and also the reputational risk for you as an authority. I would finish on that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for that. I've a few questions, and I'll start with Bailey McPherson.
Thanks indeed, convener, and a grateful thanks to both David and Stuart for the contributions. I've had a lot of engagement with your colleague Jonathan Reid over, you know, what alternative facilities can be made available, and I just really wanted to sort of speak to you and question you regarding that. And I suppose my questions are really about, given that where we are now, and you made the very reasonable point that the Olympia is the only competition pool. But what I'm really wanting to know from Dundee City Aquatics is, do you feel there is more that the City Council and specifically Leisure and Culture Dundee could be doing to provide additional support and provision? I've had a bit of engagement with Judy Dobby, the acting managing director of Leisure and Culture Dundee, in relation specifically. Now, this may or may not, but the answer maybe it may not be of assistance directly to Dundee City Aquatics. But I was very keen to see that we make maximum use of additional facilities, and I've had some engagement with Judy regarding availability of the Harris, and we seem to be coming up about all sorts of issues regarding the contract and the arrangements and staff availability and so on. I don't think these should be insurmountable, and I just really wonder, is there anything further that the City Council and Leisure and Culture Dundee could be doing to assist Dundee City Aquatics until we have the reopening of Olympia?
Sure, will I speak? Initially, I and we as a club were utterly frustrated and disappointed with the action taken to support the users. It was frustrating in the extreme, and I'll be honest, I lost faith in leisure and culture to support us in particular, but other users. That eventually moved on when we started having meaningful dialogue, and it was a wee bit heated at times in January, and we've had a number of meetings, and that's made a big difference, to be perfectly honest. The ability to communicate freely and regularly. That's improved things. Now we have been able to access pool time, and let me say quite clearly, Dundee, in terms of swimming pool provision, is apart from Olympia, is as good as any place in Scotland. The swimming pools that are in the schools, and I appreciate their school pools are not open, St Paul's, St John's, Harris, Grove, they are phenomenal facilities, and whoever was involved in the planning and building of these deserves immense credit. Whether they have been and are being used reasonably, I don't think that has always been the case, and I am pleased that we as a club, who are desperate for pool time, but also pool time at the appropriate time, are being catered for in a much better place. There are still problems. So, for example, we can have afternoon pool time at St Paul's from 4 PM. 4 PM is too early for the club. We can't get the staff there. We can't get the swimmers there. But we've gone for one day where we ourselves have to provide the lifeguards, which we've been able to do on 1 out of the 4 days that were made available. I don't think it's a done deal in terms of what it is, because I think we're still working with leisure and culture to try and find a way through that. Best use of the pool time that is available, I'm not convinced. And while I don't think bending over backwards for us and other users is utterly required, it could have been done quicker, and I think there's still work to be done. And actually, in fairness, I'm confident that we'll be able to move forward in a more trusting basis than we were until January, when we actually start to communicate.
Yeah, I'm grateful for that, David. I'll have some questions for officers regarding that, because I'm of the view that given the impact on Dundee City Aquatics and indeed others that made great use, clubs and indeed the public that make great use of Olympia, I think frankly it's incumbent upon Leisure and Culture Dundee frankly to bend over backwards to do everything that is possible to fill the gap until Olympia reopens. So I'm grateful for your response, and I'll certainly have questions for officers arising out of that response. So very grateful, thank you.
Can I just add one more very short comment? And it's as we just move into, well, I'm assuming a year, fingers crossed, a year come April, we'll be back in. I actually think there's real opportunity to work together, leisure and culture and the various users, to actually have a better use of the facility for all concerned, the public included. I'm looking forward to that, and I think we'll be in a good place sort of 9 months' time when we'll be planning for the reopening.
That's much appreciated, David, and I'm grateful for your feedback. Thank you.
Councillor McCready.
Yeah, thanks very much, Convener. I've got a couple of questions. Deputation. I think the first one would be, I think, probably to Mr. Haig. I mean, I think we heard you talking about elite swimmers who are with Dundee City Aquatic leaving because they need to get pool time and proper facilities to allow them to progress. I know this is maybe not an exact science, but I mean, what do you think the impact is on kind of at the other end of the supply of people who might go on to be elite swimmers once, if there's, you know, well over a year of hiatus in the in the facility being available? What I mean, do you think there's an opportunity lost there? Will those young folk either go elsewhere for swimming, or will they be lost to swimming? Will they be taking up other sports and things like that? So I just wonder if you can see any impact on the kind of progression through the club caused by this.
Yes, we came out of the 2 COVID lockdowns astonishingly well. I was so proud. Our guys coming back and this has made a significant impact at the younger end of the club. We're trying to shield and protect as much as possible, and I think we're doing a reasonable job. One of the attractions of Dundee is that we get a lot of 9, 10, 11-year-olds transferring over to DCA from Fife, from Angus in particular, the 2 of them in particular, and Perth and Kinross to a degree. That's why would they at the moment? They won't. So it's a wee bit sort of. I don't want to go out poaching athletes from other places, but it's routine that's been the case. They won't come here. We just have to work with what we have, and the kids and the little kids we are to work them through. The ones that we're able to retain. So impact, yeah. Will it kill us? No, it won't. But it's thin. It'll be thin for a wee while.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, and obviously, I mean, I've certainly worked with Dundee City Aquatics and happy to help in the future. And obviously, nobody, I'm sure, wants the, as you said, nobody wants to kill the club. We want to support the club and support swimming across the city, and particularly that development of possible elite athletes. My second question is to Mr. Maxwell. I mean, I think towards the end of your comments, you were talking about I think it's the Appendix 10, and how some of these things should have been known, and also your impression as a former trustee of Leisure and Culture Dundee, that there wasn't always the best, how should we say, I think probably wasn't always the best working relationship between Leisure and Culture Dundee and various bits of the City Council, and whether that has had an impact on what we see before us, and why we've got these several hundred pages of reports in front of us this afternoon. So I just wonder if you could expand a little bit on your experience of that, Stuart.
Certainly. Well, I think, as you say, I think I was asked to take on the role of league trustee for leisure and sport because I had a fairly extensive knowledge of the Olympia and of swimming, and I was well known, and also like Dundee Aqua Club and all connections there. And I suppose I wouldn't say I had an agenda, but I was keen to see improvements within swimming, and particularly within Olympia. And over the period there were. I mean, there was an aquatics programme, and there was improvements made around different structures there. But we regularly talked about some of the issues in facing the Olympia, about the diving boards, the stairs, the finishing, the pool bottom with algae, which I was told was a result of the pool sitting empty when it was first built, and then there was a reaction, and there seemed to be a regular kind of discussions with the council, and as I say, I have to give credit to Councillor Dawson, who in my book clearly argued the case for it, but there didn't seem to be any action. And again, I picked up through talking to some of the officers, with staff managers within leisure and culture, that there was frustration. And indeed, I think one did express that they didn't know the line management structure within property services to make representation. So this is, albeit this is in 2019, and so that again, you need hard evidence there. I wasn't party to those discussions. I wasn't present at those meetings, but that would indicate to me that there was some issue.
Thanks.
Councillor Short.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for your deputation. I know you're going to find it hard to believe, but back when I was a 12-year-old, I was actually cut for Scotland for my squash skills. And we used to go up to Polysport up in Cooperangus for that. And I actually was in the class with Pauline Davidson, who, if you're in swimming circles, or not swimming in circles, to be true, you'll know Pauline, I'm sure, as well. And I always remember that it was early mornings were always something that was involved in swimming. And you mentioned in the deputation about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I just wondered, is there an inability to use the schools because the schools are janitorial services outside the council remit, and is that something that has been an issue when it comes to those early mornings? And I think perhaps my other part of my question has probably been covered by Councillor McKeady, because obviously I'm up in near the Kingsway, just across from the Regional Performance Centre, and I know that a lot of the organisations who were probably very similar to yourself in those upper echelons of sport had to sort of collapse for that time where that was being built. And my understanding is, COVID to the side, that they've kind of come back to the place where they were. And so the question is, do you feel that this sort of hiatus is just that, a hiatus, and you will have folk come back? And when it comes to your swimmers, are they mobile? Do they have abilities to get out of the city? Or is there something that we can do to support those families who perhaps are at that sort of 46% of the population of Dundee that don't drive?
Yeah, shall and Judy could perhaps comment a bit on the sort of managing. What has come into place is we do have morning sessions made available I'll start again, at St Paul's High School. We get in the morning. At the moment we're accessing 3 6 a.m. starts, 6 till 8 a.m. starts. I can only emphasise again, beautiful swimming pool. I just love it. We've made progress in that way, and I think we'll make additional progress. We don't need every pool open at 6 in the morning. We're sharing it with the public 2 lanes, the public 4 lanes, the club, and I'm really quite happy with that. It's not quite Olympia, because the timetable at Olympia was, we had 4 sessions a week, and the other swimming club had a morning session a week at Olympia, and that was long course training, that was 50-metre training, and that what a difference that makes to swimmers' development. We can't do anything about that at the moment, but we have been able to access, and I think there were challenges, and I don't know the detail of the challenges. I kind of almost dismissed it, saying it's not that hard, but I think there were challenges getting staffing up there. In terms of travelling, we as a club are travelling up to Aberdeen regularly to access long course training. Our divers are travelling up to Aberdeen every couple of weeks to try and keep going, and we're travelling through to Stirling similarly. Early on we were travelling to St Andrews, which isn't so bad, or Glenrothes. There is a mobility. I'll be honest with you, it's not the cheapest sport in the world. You may think it's a case of a pair of swimming trunks and maybe a cap and goggles. It's not an inexpensive sport. I'm not conscious that we have a significant number of athletes and parents that don't have independent travel. But it's not always a case that they're able to make the travel. We're working quite heavily now with disabled swimmers, along with Leisure and Culture and Scottish Disability Sports, and providing Learn to Swim for them. And I think there's challenges in particular for families that are in that position who will be moving through. We're making progress in terms of pool access. We have no option but to travel. That is an expense, and we are trying to manage it and share travel. And as the COVID restrictions come out, that'll become easier for us.
Councillor Short, you made reference to COVID there. The COVID situation, was out of everybody's control, but I would suggest that this situation could have been avoided by some sort of effective maintenance programme to have been in place over the years, so that we didn't end up having to close a facility. And again, this is being, picked up in other parts of Scotland. We travel to other places. We were up in Aberdeen in January at the Aberdeen Sports Village, which was built slightly after the new Olympia, probably around the same price. And is a very effective facility, and people were asking us about it there. So, I think we need to bear that in mind. Thanks.
Can I maybe ask you a question? Mr. Maxwell, you made reference to the Paul Hackett report, and I don't know if that was produced at the time where you were a member of the board of Leisure and Culture, but I'm wondering if you had
I don't recall seeing it.
Any knowledge of that. Sorry? I wonder if you had any knowledge of that, and if you believe there was any areas where there has been further deterioration for work that was not potentially done. I noticed the report suggests that we should be monitoring things on a structural basis. So I'm wondering if you would like to make any comments, and perhaps maybe make a comment about the sort of temporary barrier that you suggest has been there as a safety barrier, and how potentially that's not been overcome and how long it's been there would be useful for me to have a greater understanding.
Okay. Well, can I say the Paul Hackett report, my first reading of it was this morning when I looked at the papers, and the focus of that was on water treatment, filtration and ventilation and the interrelationship of that. And from that, there was there would appear to be a number of recommendations made. To be honest, I wouldn't know if these had been actioned or not. In terms of the barriers on the diving boards, that was a result of an accident where I think a child slipped through, and kind of plastic barriers were put up as a temporary measure. But what I could see is through the evidence trail of the Appendix 10, there is fairly regular reference to the diving boards. But the last time I looked in Olympia, the temporary barriers are still up.
Okay, thank you for that. That's from the point of view of the deputation. That will be the last chance that you'll be able to make comment within the debate, because we'll go over soon to questions to officers. But I would like to thank you for taking the time for your deputation. Gives us a good understanding of where things are. I hope that Leisure and Culture will continue to work with you to overcome the barriers of access time, because it's sad news that we're losing competitive swimmers out of town while this facility is closed, never mind the revenue that is lost. I'd like to make sure that we support athletes best we can. So it's quite disappointing to hear that we potentially lose them while this facility lays empty and needing repaired. But thanks again for your deputation. I'll now move on to asking Mr. Menny to introduce the item, and then we'll move on to questions to officers. Mr. Menny.
Thank you again, Convener. As Mr. Maxwell indicated in his deputation, this matter was previously considered by the City Development Committee. And again, for the information and benefit of members of the public and press joining this afternoon, at the meeting on the 6th of December 2021, the City Development Committee noted the works undertaken to date to carry out reactive maintenance at the Olympia, noted that a planned major refurbishment for the leisure pool was currently being finalised, which would necessitate a longer-term closure of the pool facilities at Olympia, remitted the Executive Director of City Development to submit a tender report to the City Development Committee for approval at the earliest possible date, and instructed the Chief Executive to undertake a review of the design and construction of the Olympia building and to report back on the outcome. It was subsequently agreed that this matter should also be considered by the Scrutiny Committee, and the report that's before you this afternoon contains background information in order to aid your scrutiny of this matter. It was pleasing to note that Mr Maxwell regards this as a comprehensive report, and I hope it will assist elected members in asking questions of officers regarding the Olympia maintenance programme. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Well then, the note, Bailey McPherson, then you have a question for officers regarding the report.
Thank you. Yeah, I first of all, I have a question for officers in relation to what's actually in the report at 4.1, and it slightly arises from something that was said by the deputation, by Stuart Maxwell during the deputation. I'll come on to that in a moment. I just want to, before I launch into that, just ask another question in relation to the provision of facilities elsewhere in the city, for not just Dundee City Aquatics, but for all clubs and the public whilst the Olympia is closed. Because as was alluded to, there was obviously clearly, and I know this from correspondence I had with a colleague of Mr Haig and Mr Maxwell, some frustration, particularly at the start, at the turn of the year, in relation to getting adequate or as much provision as possible, and frankly, clear dialogue and fast responses. I think that's improved a bit. But I would just really like reassurances, and perhaps comes from Leisure and Culture Dundee as much from Dundee City Council, in relation to the provision of facilities. And in particular, I had an exchange, I've had some exchanges with Mrs Dobby of Leisure and Culture Dundee regarding the possible use of Harris Academy. And it all seems to come down to the PPP contract and unsociable hours for certain staff, and getting resources, and Robertson FM, etc., etc. And I just feel that, frankly, it needs just a bit of somebody to grab this and shake it and do it. Because if we've got a facility sitting there, and it strikes me as blindingly silly, really silly, that if there is any hour that it could be used to help support swimming in the city, whether that's for a club or for the public, it should be being used. So can I have an assurance that that will be revisited, and that we will make maximum effort in the year, because it will be the best part of a year, certainly before Olympia reopens, that we have maximum use of alternative facilities. And if that involves, you know, thinking out of the box a little bit and seeking a bit of cooperation in relation to, for example, PPP contracts, then so be it. I think we should just actually just bite the bullet and do our best to ensure that there is maximum alternative provision.
We've got an offer that's able to give Bailey McPherson an answer. Chief Executive.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. If I can just pass this over to Judy Dobby to give a response from Leisure and Culture Dundee, but to confirm to Bailey McPherson the Council's position that we will look to take whatever steps necessary to enable the swimming pool to be available if there is the requirement to do so. And I'll pass over to Judy to confirm from a Leisure and Culture Dundee perspective.
Okay, thank you. Judy.
Thanks very much, and for the question, Bailey McPherson. Again, just to reassure you, we will do whatever it takes. We really appreciate the cooperation we've had from Mr Haig and Mr Maxwell and others in terms of working with us to get us to a point where we have a level of provision in the city, but we know that journey's not ended, and we will continue to meet with the clubs and work with them, see what else.
Obviously, Mrs Dobby disappeared a little bit towards the end, but I think we got the gist of that. So that's great in general terms, and I'm grateful for the Chief Executive's assurance that Dundee City Council will do all it can. That comes down to practical things. Now, I have an email from Mrs Dobby dated 17th of March in relation to Harris Academy, and I'm not having a go at Mrs Dobby because she's just reiterating what she got from City Council City Development. But really, it's a list of problems and how to resolve it. Unsociable hours required, may also struggle to get resource in certain circumstances. This is assuming any of the pools technicians are willing to be on site at that time, etc., etc., etc. Now, I don't disagree that these are issues, don't disagree at all. But if we're really serious about making maximum use of our facilities, these are issues that we really have to resolve. And I would say it's great that there's continuing work happening to ensure that happens. But here we are in March. That report, the report we're now referring to, 336/2021, went to committee in December. Here we are almost in April. And so I just simply say what I'm seeking is an assurance that everything will be done, and I'm now speaking specifically regarding Harris Academy, everything will be done to ensure that the difficulties of using Harris out of hours and over weekends are grasped and overcome so that we make maximum use of what are actually quite splendid facilities. And I have to say, I think it was David Haig who made the point about the quality of facilities in our, various of our schools. That's absolutely true. Facilities at Harris are great. I just think it's a crying shame that you've got something sitting empty when it could actually be being used at certain times.
Yep. Does Chief Executive want to make the same comment again, or do you think you've given a reassurance you try to do what you can?
Yeah, thanks, convener. So happy to provide that reassurance that the issues that Bailey McPherson has noted, I will take that up with both Judy Dobby and the Executive Director of Children and Families to work through at pace a solution.
That's greatly appreciated, Mr. Colgan. It really is. And I would be grateful if not just me, but other members of the Scrutiny Committee are updated with progress on that. Can I ask my second question, convener?
Yeah, certainly.
And it really arises actually out of a comment that was made by the deputation relative to what's in report 336/2021 at 4.1, and it talks about the fact that the health and safety risk was identified at Olympia on the 29th of September 2021. Well, that's true, but as he alluded to, and you don't have to read all the hundreds of pages sitting to my side to know that, but that certainly reinforces what I think we now all know, and clearly members of the Leisure and Culture Dundee Board knew for a very long time, that there were significant issues over a long period of time. Now, what's very clear, and I don't know if this is the appropriate point to ask Mr. Many, but I'm going to do so now, and it's really particularly in relation to that passage of time. It's quite clear that there were issues at Olympia noted by the board, and in fact brought to the attention of the then Chief Executive, Mr. Colgan's predecessor, Mr. Dorward, back in 2014. Mr. Dorward wrote to Mansell, the contractor, part of the Balfour Beatty Group, I think, back in 2014, regarding the concerns at that time. Now, at a previous meeting that I had, I can't remember if it was a pre-agenda or whatever, Mr. Many indicated that he, from a legal perspective, he and his colleagues were looking at where did liability fall and what fell upon the contractor. Now, I'm conscious this is 2022, the thing was opened in 2013. The point really being that what I would like to know is two things. One is, has there been any contact with the Balfour Beatty since this has all blown up? Because to those of us that were never on the Leisure and Culture Dundee Board, actually, this was news. This was frankly news. And so I've not known since 2014. I do know now when I have a good idea as to what happened when. But the point I make is it was known over a long period of time. The then Chief Executive Dundee City Council wrote to Mansell in 2014. So what engagement has there been with Mansell? And also, have they indicated a willingness, whether through actual legal liability or otherwise, to step in and assist with regards to the costs in relation to the works required? And secondly, has Mr. Many and his colleagues come to any conclusion regarding that liability?
You got an answer to that, Mr. Many?
Yes, thank you, Convener. Thank you, Bailey McPherson. To confirm that no, my review of this particular issue has not concluded as yet. Should I conclude that liability for this falls on the contractor, the first thing I would do in accordance with proper practice in these matters is to give the contractor the opportunity to rectify the situation voluntarily. Failing that, as I indicated at previous meetings, I do have delegated authority to raise legal actions where I believe that that's in the Council's best interests. And if I do conclude as a result of my review of matters that it would be in the Council's best interest to raise proceedings against any contractor or subcontractor, that is the course I would pursue.
Okay, I'm grateful for that. Just a very brief follow-up. I don't want to hog this. Just a very brief follow-up. Does Mr. Minnie have any indication as to how long it's likely to now take? Because I'm conscious of the passage of time. And the other part of my question, leaving aside a formal contact with Balfour Beatty as a result of these investigations Mr. Minnie and the legal team are currently undertaking, what engagement has there actually been in an informal or formal sense with Balfour Beatty following, over the past few years, following the initial letter from Mr. Dorward to them in 2014?
You're able to respond, Mr. May?
Thank you again, Convener. Thank you, Bailey McPherson. At this stage, it's not possible for me to say when the review will be complete, but I can give all members of the Scrutiny Committee an assurance that that will be done just as soon as possible. Clearly, as you'll be aware, a significant amount of work has been put into preparing papers for the committee this afternoon. I believe that I probably now have all relevant information, but if there is any other information that is available to me, I will consider that before concluding the review. With regard to contact with Mansell or Balfour Beatty over the years, I would have to defer to the technical officers, and I don't know whether or not the technical officers concerned, because of the post they may have held at the time, would be able to answer that question of their own knowledge, or whether they could only answer on the basis of what they know of what happened at that time.
Is there any of the technical officers able to shed some more light for Bailey McPherson? Mr. Presswood.
Many thanks, Convener. I'm happy to provide what information we do have. From our perspective, we think that the works fall into three distinct phases. And the first is the snagging post-completion of the building. And I think members are aware from the evidence presented today that at the point of handover, there were 177 issues outstanding, which were challenged through the defects liability period. Now, the vast majority of those were resolved to the team's satisfaction, but it was clear after some time that some of those remedies were not substantive enough to deal with the wears and tears of one of the most intensively used facilities in council ownership. We then enter the second period of time, which is the issues identified post-capital project, and that effectively would be the period 2017 to 2019. And there would have been engagement with the contractor during that time, but it's clear that relations with the contractor were not strong, and there was a significant unwillingness from the contractor's point of view to get involved in remedies at that time. The joint teams, Leisure and Culture and Property, worked to understand these issues, and the Hackett report was commissioned at the start of this 2017-2019 period to understand the issues around water quality, etc., as Mr. Maxwell has talked about previously. The final stage is jointly working with Leisure and Culture Dundee to identify what a capital programme might look like and what a planned closure might look like, and that is the period 2019 through 2021. And it was apparent during that period that the close down would be required. But I think it is clear that in the period 2017 to 2019, that there was no willingness from the contractors to revisit the site. But I'll ask the Head of Design and Property, Mr. Martin, just to supplement that with any precise detail around when the contractor ceased to provide any support to the facility, if he has that knowledge available.
Thanks, Convener. Thanks, Billy McPherson. There isn't a lot that I can add to that. answer from Mr. Presswood. You know, there's not a defined line that's black and white when a dialogue didn't take place, and it very much is on the basis of that matters were carried out by the contractor and rectifications were taking place and subsequent to that period of time. As Mr. Presswood pointed out, in such a environment that is utilised over a long period of time, and with the type of chemicals, etc., some of these have proven not to be as successful as one would have wanted. And we've clearly got these items that are isolated, but are legacy items that we're looking to deal with going forward.
Okay, I don't want to hog this, so I'm going to be quiet now. But it does strike me that there is a period of contractual liability. It does strike me reading between. I don't need to even read between the lines of what Mr. President, Mr. Martin said, that perhaps engagement with Mansell Balfour Beatty wasn't as strong as it could have been. But clearly, you know, I'm reassured that Mr. Menny is and his team are looking at the legal position in regard to that, and obviously we'll wait to hear further in that regard.
Can I maybe ask a supplementary in relation to that particular section, because it sounds to me in the line of questioning from Billy McPherson that there was issues that we as a council felt still existed and still lay some responsibility with the contractor quite a number of years back. So I'm wondering at that stage, was there any consideration to pursue the matter slightly further legally at that time? You know, as the contractor decided to throw you a deaf ear.
Chair, I'm happy to.
Mr. Presswood.
Yeah, I'm happy to give my understanding of the timeline. As members will be aware, the practical completion took place around May 2013, and at that point, the defects liability period was really intensively negotiated between council officers with advice from Leisure and Culture Dundee, and that was the 177 defects that I'd identified. By 2014, the vast majority of those 177 defects had been resolved. And it's clear from the Leisure and Culture Dundee minutes, which are very helpful, that by, for example, 2014, 13th of March 2014, the Leisure and Culture Dundee minute highlights that 95% of the leaks had been fixed. So that's not in any way to be complacent about what the team at that time were doing. But it's clear that the contractor was being pursued throughout this period to resolve those issues. There was ongoing correspondence between the City Council and Mansell to the period 2017, but I think it's clear that Mansell's desire to further engage and further resolve what we perceived as outstanding legacy issues reduced very considerably, and I think it's clear that in the period beyond that, there's been very little support or input from Mansell.
Is there any estimate on what council have spent on repairing legacy issues for that date? Or have they remained largely unrepaired?
I'll ask Mr. Martin to comment on that. I would say they certainly haven't remained largely unrepaired. I think I gave the figure of around £200,000 per annum of repairs and maintenance on the Olympia, and I think it is our most complex building, and it's the hardest working of our building, as Mr. Martin's emphasised. But the figure of roughly £200,000, 2019-20, £265,000. So there's a requirement for regular repairs and maintenance during that period. There has been capital investment as well, as members are aware. I think it's very difficult for us to disaggregate the attempts to resolve long-standing issues from the routine repairs and maintenance which the council requires to carry out. And it is absolutely clear that since 2018-29 we've been working with Leisure and Culture Dundee to scope out a major capital programme which would necessitate a closure period, and I'm sure that will have been communicated to the the major user groups of the facility to ensure that they were aware of the need at some point in the future for planned closure. Now that would be a capital programme. I think it would be difficult from my layperson's assessment to be clear which of those items were latent defects from the construction period and what were simply wear and tear and normal cyclical maintenance. But again, Mr. Martin may wish to supplement or indeed correct my answer.
Thanks, Bailey Kieran. Thanks, Robin. You're absolutely right. It would be very subjective to put an estimate on these items, and just to reinforce the point in terms of water egress and the complexities of the building. Obviously, there's evidence that we've got before us that shows that efforts have been made over a considerable period of time, and they have been successful to an extent, and then that performance has been lost. So clearly, this more major interaction in terms of the works that we're proposing is to ensure that we can get to the bottom of exactly what the problem is and put a more permanent rectification in place. But in terms of actually costing and deciphering that and reducing to each item would be subjective at best.
Okay, I'm going to move on to other questions. I noticed that Bailey Scott's looking to come in. I would just say to people that I'm not looking to hold people with two questions. If you feel that later in the debate you want to come back in again, by all means feel free to come back in. There's 800 odd pages and we want to be as thorough as we can. Bailey Scott.
Thanks, Convener. I wonder whether it would be possible, please, if I could go right back to the very beginning when the facility was constructed, and maybe explain who was responsible for the design and the materials used and the specification of the works and so on. Because it seems from reading through all these papers that some of the materials that were used weren't suitable for the environment that they're operating in, and that the design caused some problems as well from the very beginning, such as not being able to adequately deal with condensation, which has ended up causing all the corrosion that we're now hearing about. So if you could give me just an explanation of what at each stage the council had some input into there to seeing what was being done, and was the council responsible for specifying the types of materials that ought to that were being used. And when it came to the construction of the swimming pool area itself, I mean, presumably there were specialist subcontractors used for that who would be aware of the requirements of making sure that any materials that were fitted or anything that was installed would be done when in the right temperatures and so on, to make sure there wasn't any problems being built into the facility that would come up as they are now with problems.
Mr. Presswood.
Yeah, Chair, very happy to answer that, and again ask Mr. Martin to supplement. I think in terms of the design, it would be a combination. First of all, leisure would have led in terms of the client brief, so that would have addressed things such as what was going to be in the pool, whether or not there was going to be a wave pool, the use or otherwise of pool covers. So there would have been that broad client brief. The second thing would have been the high-level architectural design, which would have been carried out internally. And then there would have been an element of contractor design and build for some of the content within the building. But I'll ask Mr. Martin to detail as far as he can who did what during that design period.
Mr. Martin.
Thanks, Convener. Thanks, Bailey Scott. Yeah, so in terms of how the contract was in place, it was a council-led project in terms of the design, but clearly being a highly serviced, specialised leisure facility, there's a lot of interfaces with other suppliers, subcontractors and specialist designers within that. So part of the contractors design portion elements that are incorporated into that. And within the 800 pages, there is some documentation that relates to that. Within each work package, there are some elements of that. So, for example, the water treatment clearly in the services, mechanical, ventilation and such like, there are elements of that that are interfaced between the specialists and the in-house designers. And I would say to give a rule of thumb, there's maybe about 1/3, maybe slightly more than that in terms of a value that would be contractors' design portion. So from my point of view, what that signifies is there's a significant amount of value and content that is specialist and out with the council. But these things, they do all interlink in terms of speaking about the ventilation in isolation. It's not possible to say that that is necessarily what the root cause of the corrosion is, and there could be a number of items that lead to that, whether it is through design, the quality of the installation, the materials used, terms of maintenance and cleaning and such like, the operational hours, the amount of time that it's been used and such like. And we've also spoken in the previous committee report about the dosing in the pool and such like. So at this stage, that's the overview of what we're looking at, and part of the works that we're carrying out just now and the specialist reports we're getting are to look into these so we can fully diagnose any root causes, and then that'll then inform what the solution that we'll come up with to take forward in the works going that will progress in due course.
Okay, I've got a couple of other questions, Convener, if that's okay. I want to ask about the water leaks in the plant room, which initially wasn't known where they were coming from, and then it might have been from the showers. But I think there was also an issue of water coming up the way as well when there was heavy rain. And the very first report we have in here from the health and safety group that met talks about the water ingress into the plant room. And then the very last one that we've got from in here from 2020 talks about the same thing. Why has it taken so long to rectify that, or why hasn't it? And I appreciate that you would be looking for the contractors to remedy that, but if it was an issue that was causing alarm to the health and safety group, why hasn't it been dealt before now?
Mr. Presswood.
Chair, I think that there will be others on the call that are closer to this issue, but having read the leisure and culture documentation, which is immensely helpful, it's clear that at points the issue was resolved or very substantially resolved. And as far as I can tell, that 2014 leisure and culture minute, which I referred to, which said that 95% of the leaks were fixed. My understanding is, and again, Mr. Martin may wish to comment, my understanding is that they will have been fixed at the contractor's expense. So 2014, we believe that the leaks are largely resolved. It is clear then later in the timeline that the leaks have started to come back. So it's important, I think, to separate these distinct phases. And I think it would be unfortunate if members had the impression that the plant room had consistently had leaks and nothing had been done about it, because there clearly has been a very substantial effort by officers to resolve this issue, and particularly putting pressure on Mansell during the early years to rectify the issue. Mr. Martin, would you care to comment?
Thanks again for the question. Thanks, Robin. Yeah, I would just really emphasise that, you know, efforts have been made over that period of time through the contractor and beyond, and you know these rectifications did perform, but were clearly short-lived. So what we're dealing with here is a extremely stubborn and irritating issue that we've not managed to get resolved, and potentially it's related to the ongoing stresses in an environment of this building, how it works. And clearly, as I've mentioned previously, what we want to do is find out during this closure exactly what the solution is and implement that going forward.
Okay, and one last question, Convener, please.
Sure.
It's in regarding the Paul Hackett report, and wanted to ask about the way Leisure and Culture Dundee were operating the facility, because it mentions in there about the relative humidity being out of specification, and which might be accelerating the corrosion. And I just wondered what processes are in place by the operators of the facility to make sure that the facility is being running at the optimum standards, to make sure that any problems that might be caused by issues such as humidity are being properly managed and taken care of.
Officer, got to respond to that? Judy?
Thanks for the question, Bailey Scott. Apologies if I cut out. I'm just going to turn my camera off because my connection is not great. Following that report, I wasn't directly involved at the time. I do know that different measures were put in place to address the comments that were raised. So in terms of the humidity, there was a definite monitoring of the temperature controls within the building to make sure that there was no ongoing impact from that.
Neil, you look to.
Thanks, convener. So just to add to that, obviously.
Did you finish there, or you seem to get cut out?
No, that was fine.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. Yeah.
No problem. Neil, you're looking to make a comment as well, yeah?
Yeah, thanks, convener. It was really just to emphasise the point that the report commissioned by Leisure and Culture in March 2017, that City Development colleagues at that time did work closely on that in terms of the mechanical ventilation. And although not necessarily fully agreeing with the commentary on that, they went in and the health and safety contractor reset the humidity, the ventilation controls to the default set points. And as Judy said, in terms of monitoring since that, you know, that has been an ongoing factor. But as I mentioned previously, this is just one factor that's to be looked at in terms of a number of possible reasons, and a combination is probably more than likely of why we've had that issue, and clearly it will be looked at going forward.
Okay. You complete, Bailey Scott?
Thanks, convener, but I might come back in again later if something's raised.
Yeah, that'd be fine.
Thanks, thank you.
Can I maybe delve a bit deeper in relation to the corrosion and in relation to the amount of money that was spent maintaining the building? We have obviously 200,000 per year or thereabout. I'm just wondering if there's a sort of annual maintenance programme that's been spent on. What tests or what work have we done in specific to corrosion, you know, at early stages to prevent it getting any worse? And what have we been spending in the plant room to overcome the issues? And how much water do we actually have in there? Is it you know, several inches of water on the floor, or you know, how big is the problem? Mr. Presswood.
Chair, I'm happy to come in, particularly on the corrosion issue, and then I'll ask Mr. Martin to comment on the plant room issue. I think last time we briefed committee, we'd identified 9 potential issues for the corrosion, including ventilation and humidity, cleaning, the chemical dosing of the pools, the use of a pool cover, etc., etc. And clearly the corrosion issue was one of the major reasons I understand that the Hackett report was commissioned. So as Mr. Martin said, that the officers of LCD and the City Council did work jointly on a response to the Hackett report, and that looked at issues such as the cleaning regime, such as the ventilation issue, to try and resolve the issue. What I don't have is a breakdown of that £200,000 annual spend. It is important to note that the Leisure and Culture Dundee minutes are immensely helpful. What we don't have here is a breakdown of spend, and partly that's because we don't have a historical email archive, but the vast majority of spend is through the GVA property asset management system. So that evidence will be available. It could be very time consuming to produce that breakdown of what that average spend is, but we will endeavour to do so, just to understand how much of that has been spent on the superficial corrosion in the flume towers. I think the final point I would make is, as I said previously, this is an issue which has been emerging over a number of years. We've been working with colleagues in Leisure and Culture Dundee, and the conclusion has been that a major planned closure, strip down of the flume tower and reinstatement of all the components is required. So that expenditure clearly hasn't taken place yet. It will be part of the 4.5 million that we've quoted in the previous committee report. So, and the flume tower will obviously be a fairly major component of that. Mr. Martin, do you want to come in and pick up any other points on that, and then the specific issue around water ingress?
Yeah, thanks. In terms of the corrosion, but as Mr. Presswood points out, we can look into that. That said, on the basis that it was superficial and not structural, I would anticipate that expenditure would be to the smaller end at this stage. I suppose to give members a bit of reassurance, we've done a wee bit of research with the Chartered Institute of Surveyors and their building index and maintenance costs. And just as a barometer, in terms of the annual spend for a leisure facility of this size, would be in the region of 180 to 200,000 pounds a year. So it's just to give members that reassurance that that we are investing and looking after the property as appropriate. In terms of your second point, Bailey Keenan, the plant room and the water, clearly is very difficult to quantify, and as we've outlined, the success or partial success in curing, and that's varied over time. So the amount of water has varied. As always, clearly nobody's wanting to see any water within a plant room or anywhere near anything like that, but it has been monitored and managed over that period of time. And all I can say is that clearly we're looking at rectifying that issue, so it's not a problem going forward.
Can I maybe ask that, you're saying that the corrosion is superficial, and that to me would suggest that you take a bit of sandpaper, you rub it into bare metal, and you apply some coating, and that would protect it. So I'm wondering how many times we've done that, and what sort of different coatings have we tried to overcome the problem, because it sounds to me like, part of the overall maintenance cost or overall sort of problem is for a major refit of these that particular part. That will be quite a considerable strip down, and it's adding quite plenty of time to the period that the pool will be closed. So what test corrosion resistant materials have we been looking at? What paint companies have we had in? What coatings are they recommending? And is there a method to overcome? Mr. Presswood.
Chair, thank you for that. There have been various tests on the stainless steel used within the flume tower, and obviously members would normally anticipate the stainless steel would not rust. The tests have shown that the stainless steel used in the flume tower is per the original specification, and I think for the reasons we've highlighted earlier, corrosion has occurred for a number of reasons. One of the options is to manage the cleaning of the wipe down of the stainless steel areas effectively, and we know that that's something which came out of the Hackett report, considering whether there was adequate cleaning of the towers being carried on. In terms of whether any coating can be applied to stainless steel, I'm not a chemist, I can't answer that question, but there's no doubt that will be explored in more detail as part of the substantial contract going forward. But I'm not sure whether Mr. Martin can throw any light on that question.
Thanks, Bailey Keenan. Thanks, Robin. So in terms of this paint specification, and I'll maybe bring my colleague Gary Brady in just to give a bit more technical information. The specification that was provided has performed over the period, because clearly there's vast areas that are still absolutely fine. and it's more in relation to when it's come into contact with the water or there has been some impact damage where that has happened. And I think in terms of your point in relation to rectification, part of the reason that hasn't happened is possibly because it's the underside and the accessibility and potential disruption and closure, and trying to avoid that. And that's not to say people haven't looked at exploring options to see how we could get around that, but clearly there hasn't been a ready solution that's we've been able to implement and put in place, or that would have been done so prior to this point in time. But I'll maybe ask Mr. Brady to come in just to make some comment regards paint specification and alternatives and the properties of stainless steel.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Martin's completely correct that the paint specification for the carbon steel, the mild steel, is has proven itself over the time in the principal areas of the structure. There are some areas of mechanical damage where the paint has been damaged and broken down, and there are some soft areas in amongst the flume launch platform that are difficult to access. Your analogy of sandpaper and cleaning off the rust is correct, although on an industrial scale that's more blast cleaning and quite disruptive, which is why some of these elements perhaps have to be taken off site, and that influences the timescale and the cleaning process. In terms of paint specification, we have a guidance from Tata Steel, who are the previously British Steel, who provide guidance on the use of coating systems in swimming pools. So we have a fully compliant swimming pool grade paint specification for the mild steel. For the stainless steel, the majority of it is superficial corrosion, which can be cleaned off. Industry guidance is against coating stainless steel because stainless steel can suffer from hidden corrosion that doesn't show up rust staining. So it's better to be visible and uncoated rather than coated and being hidden. That helps answer the question.
Okay, thanks very much for that. I'll move on then. I think it's Councillor McCready.
Yeah, thanks very much, Convener. And with a wee bit of indulgence, I've got a couple of questions, and I'm sure I'll come back for some more. But my first question is a kind of follow-up to the exchange between Bailey McPherson and Mr. Mennie. And I was minded to ask a similar question about possible legal action. And I note that Mr. Mennie said he's not concluded his review. Can we just get an assurance from Mr. Mennie that when he does conclude that review, that will be reported in some formal manner to the council, either through the Scrutiny Committee, through the City Council, or Policy and Resources? I mean, I understand that might need to be done in a confidential manner, but I think it should be reported formally to council. So I wonder if Mr. Mennie's got an answer for that one, and then I've got a couple of other questions, Convener. Thanks.
Okay. Mr. Mennie.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Councillor McCready. I'm very pleased to give you and the other members of the Scrutiny Committee that assurance.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. I wanted to focus at this point in time around the report from that was agreed in December, or went to committee on 6th of December 2021. Can I ask about paragraph 4.2 B, which talks about the works to, we heard particularly from the deputation, I think we should be very concerned about getting the swimming pool back up and running. I think we also do need to find out about what went wrong and try and learn lessons, but clearly there are lots of people who want to go swimming in the city, and they're being denied the full range of options at this moment in time. So can I ask when the works are going to start, and when the projection for the Olympia to reopen is? Because I note in the report it says that works will projected start on site for the works is first quarter of 2022. As I understand it, that means there's a week left.
Chair, happy to respond to that if that would be helpful.
Sure.
I think the first thing is to say that officers of city developments, and I'm sure Leisure and Culture Dundee, share the frustrations of the users of the facility, and particularly the swimming and aquatics clubs that we heard from earlier on. We are absolutely focused on getting the specification for the works agreed with the contractor, getting the contract let and getting on site. I think Councillor McCready is absolutely correct in his assumption this will not be on site within the first quarter, and we now anticipate that a report will be brought back to members in early summer, and there has been very, very considerable work with the contractor. I think members will see within the paperwork there's 21 pages of specification for the work, and Mr. Martin and his team have been ensuring that everything possible to prevent further issues within the building is being done at this stage. So I think the scope of works has ended up more extensive than initially envisaged. There have been substantial issues in terms of access to specialist contractors, specialist experts. So I do apologise, but it will not be possible to hit the original timescale set out in that report. Perhaps ask Mr. Martin to say a little bit more.
Thanks, Councillor McCready. Thanks, Robin. Yeah, I suppose just to give an example, and it's clearly an industry issue, as we know, things are taking longer and there's scarce demand. But once we get into the specialist area of leisure facilities and swimming pools, there's an increasingly smaller level of staff and resource to go around. So specifically, pool consultants, ventilation consultants, as you can imagine, have been in high premium, particularly during COVID, and actually getting them appointed on site, get their resources and input very much influences the programme in terms of what we can and can't achieve. But to echo what Robin said in terms of the urgency, every effort is being made by all involved, staff within city development, working closely with Judy's team, the contractor, subcontractors, our internal designers, and to give reassurance prior to that report going to committee in December, weekly meetings with designers and contractors and dialogue had been taking place to mitigate the length of period that we'll have this facility closed, so we can actually get it, the works done and get the swimming groups and users back in the facility as soon as is reasonably practicable.
Mr. McCready?
Yeah, no, I think that's helpful. And I mean, can I say to officers, I think it's important that, I mean, absolutely, I think we need to listen to what the swimming fraternity said, particularly in the deputations, but it's crucially important that we get this, that the City Council gets this right this time. So I think that's fine. So, I mean, my next question was going to be, and I think I know the answer is, given those other questions, I was also going to ask if there was any update on the financial cost of the Olympia repairs, given that, you know, time is moving on, and given, you know, we're all very aware of, you know, the issues that Mr. Martin was alluding to, I think, around, you know, which might be around Brexit, might be around COVID, and might also be around the illegal war in Ukraine. So, I mean, I just wonder if there's any update on cost, and also finally on that, on the report from December, it does say, I think in 4.4 in the report, that as part of a review of the operational management, that a specialist pool consultant will be appointed to assist and support. I mean, I just wonder, are we convinced, and are officers convinced, that the expertise has been existing within Dundee City Council and or Leisure and Culture Dundee to run this building? Because I mean, we've heard today that it is you know, one of the hardest working buildings, I think was one of the expressions used. It's one of the most hostile environments for a building by Dundee City Council. But, you know, I say gently, that shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. We knew it was going to be a swimming pool with lots of water, lots of chemicals, high degree of humidity. You know, we knew these things, or we should have known these things. So a little bit concerned about that. And the other, I mean, this other side to this, which might be slightly counterintuitive to about the point I've just made, is that when asked about local employment on the building of the Olympia, we were told time after time that we needed to employ a specialist swimming pool contractor to do this. I mean, I'm just not convinced that looks like it's worked out particularly well. You know, I mean, we did have, you know, I think there have been problems from the very beginning, and I think that's something that we should be concerned about. So I just wonder if officers have got answers to any of those. Thanks, convener.
Yeah. So, Press, are you looking to respond?
Yeah, I'll ask Mr. Martin to give an update on the appointment of the pool consultants, and I very much accept the challenge by Councillor McCready around whether we have the expertise. I believe that we do. I think the quality of the analysis which has been done by officers into the problems, I do not believe that if we had an external contractor managing the facility or an external contractor responsible for maintenance, would there be any substantial difference to the position we're in just now? I don't believe so. Obviously, there may be others who bring alternative solutions and approaches to the table, but my instinct is that we do have the right skills between Leisure and Culture Dundee and Dundee City Council. And that's not in any way to minimise the problems that we face today. I think it is a legitimate challenge from Councillor McCready, but I'm honestly not convinced that if we brought in a private sector operator or a private sector maintenance team, we would substantially improve matters. And there is, of course, the potential that it might become significantly more expensive than the in-house partnership between LCD and the City Council. Mr. Martin, can you pick up the issue of the specialist pool consultant, please?
Thanks, Councillor McCready. Thanks, Robin. Just to go back to your very first point, Councillor McCready, you're quite right in terms of the commercial position, in terms of the 3 criteria you outlined, but it will be a lot closer to when we get a full tender back and bring it to members for their consideration at committee, that we'll have more accurate figures. Just in terms of the pool consultant, so to reinforce Mr. Presswood's point, you know, there's a vast skill set across city development, leisure and culture, but from the point in time, you know, we're speaking about the building opening in 2013, and while that is not a long period of time, the design for that would have happened in the previous years. So we are speaking about a period circa 10 years since these specifications, etc., were put in place. So from one aspect, we want the best knowledge out there of what is current technology has moved on in a number of fields, whether that's just mainstream construction or in terms of pools and what have you. So it is very much to review and get the knowledge and learnings from every place else, so we can actually take that on board, see what we've got, evaluate it, and then implement the appropriate solutions going forward. And the other part of that is, as you point out in the committee report, we are speaking about an asset, and a very important asset to the council. And it's also about how we'll look after that once we've carried out these works in terms of going forward. And that's part of the remit of the pool consultant, to work in conjunction with us to put recommendations in place.
Yeah, so Presswood, you still like to comment?
No, sorry, that's a legacy hand.
Councillor McCready.
Yeah, no, thanks very much. I think that those were helpful answers. I mean, I think it might be helpful if officers were able. I mean, I absolutely take Mr. Presswood's point. You know, I'm not one for arguing for external consultants. You know, but I think we need to make sure that we have got the right, you know, the right level of expertise here to run what is a particularly specialist building. I wonder, I just got 2 follow-ups on that. How are we aware, and this maybe Judy Dobie might be the one to answer this, or others, are we aware of what other leisure trusts or councils do in terms of managing swimming pools? You know, how much would there be, you know, that level of expertise internal to the council or the arm's length trust, if that's how it's operated? And just on the question around the further report coming back to committee at some point in the future, are we still, are officers still saying that up to £4.5 million is a realistic figure, or are we expecting that to increase?
Mr. Presswood, you want to respond?
I will choose my words carefully, but at this time we do not envisage that there is a substantial risk of that being exceeded. But Mr. Martin, I'm not sure whether you want to expand on that.
Thanks, Councillor McCready. I think the only other comment I would make on that is, and we've mentioned the criteria before, we are in unprecedented times in terms of fluctuations in cost and supply. So we are monitoring that across all projects. It feels like on a daily basis, but weekly and monthly basis. So we do just need to track that in. And in terms of working with the supply chain and offering as much lead-in time as possible, we're doing that to manage the cost as best we can. So we're doing everything in our powers to look after that on behalf of the council.
I think, Judy, you're looking to come in?
Thanks, convener. It was just to echo something that Robin Presswood said earlier on, and I think we do have the expertise within our teams at Leisure and Culture and the council, and we do regularly speak to pool operators across the country to make sure that we have the right standards of operation in place.
Okay, thanks for that. You'd like to come back in again?
No, I'll leave it now. Thanks, convener.
Okay, we'll move on to Councillor Short.
Thank you, convener. I'm just going to start with a wee bit of a timeline. In 2014, I think you were perhaps all elected, but it was before my time. But at that point, I was still running around in the world of property management and the RICS, which I know that Mr. Martin has talked about. And David Dorward, and now we've got Mr. Colgan. So there's been a lot of water under the bridge since that time. However, I'm actually trying to, it's very difficult to get your head around it to begin with, because I did come from that world. And as a general rule, what we would tend to see is a developer then becoming a landlord who would then get a tenant, and it would completely change it because an FRI lease would go into the building. We have a very different situation here because we have effectively an at-length body who we operate with. So it's a bit outside the norm that I had been used to when I came in. So it's more a partnership than that sort of different kind of model. We've talked already this afternoon about the Hackett report, which was a bit of a pivotal point in 2017. But I remember, and I believe perhaps someone who remembers better than me, it was about 17, 18. We also had SIPFA in. And there was a SIPFA report around the relationship between city development and very many of the different partners that we have. And at that point, I think we started a different model of investing within the buildings across the council. And I just want to confirm about where we're moving in the direction of relationships.
There you go. See, we've got off. Let's see if she gets back in. Maybe move on and come back to Councillor Short and have a response to the question she was asking. We'll go on to Bailey McPherson.
Thanks.
You're breaking up as well.
The reason I'm coming to and sorry, can you hear me okay?
It was breaking up a bit.
Can I try again? Can you hear me okay?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, I'll start again. I'm really coming back in on the previous discussion regarding the humidity issue. And it was a comment Mr. Martin made, I think it was Mr. Martin, about city development didn't necessarily fully agree with the comment. I'd like to sort of explore that a little bit further. Now, I think according to the Paul Hackett report from 2017, I think he said the recommendation of 3 professional bodies concerned with the running of swimming pools was that pool hall ventilation should keep relative humidity at around 55 to 65%. And I think it's on page 663 of that tome that we were sent. Yet at times at the Olympia, it was measured to be between 68 and 82%, obviously leading to condensation and potentially accelerating corrosion. So I suppose it's a not good practice prior to 720, if known.
Billy McPherson, maybe useful if you put your camera off and see if that helps.
Yeah, I will.
Sorry about that. But try again.
How much of that did you? Are you hearing me okay now?
Reasonably well. Give it a try.
Right. Did you get any of my question? Can I make a suggestion, convener? I can come in on a. I'll come in on a separate device in a moment. Would you like to go to Bailey Sawyers and come back to me? Thank you.
I'll certainly do that. Okay. Bailey Sawyers.
Yeah, thanks, convener. I thought I saw that Councillor Short was back in the call. I don't know if you want to go back to her first.
Yeah, I'm easy about that then. So, Councillor Short, are you able to carry on with your question? No, maybe still having an issue. Okay, Willie, back to yourself.
Thanks, convener. Can I go back a bit on Bailey Scott kind of touched on some of this about the, I suppose, the design, and it was really the procurement process. Can somebody explain to me how that worked? Because I mean, as a number of people have said, this is clearly a very, very complex building, probably the most complex building the council have ever built. So can somebody explain the procurement process and tell me if we were, let's say we were building another Olympia, another swimming pool anyway, would the procurement process be the same as what it was 10, 12 years ago? Or has that changed? And my second question was the site at Allen Street. Just kind of looking at it from outside, it seems a very tight. And I wonder if the choice of site had any knock-on implications on how the building was then designed.
Mr. Presswood, are you able to respond?
Yeah, Chair, I'll ask Mr. Martin to talk about the procurement issue because he has become the council's expert on the use of framework agreements, and I'm conscious that at the time that Olympia was being procured, that wasn't a route that was open to us. So I think he may be able to offer some insight as to whether, with the great benefit of that precise science hindsight, we would have done a different procurement route. In terms of the site, again, that's something which was raised at City Development Committee originally, and members had greater memory of the issues there than indeed many of the officers did because of turnover of staff. I would make the observation that it is a comparatively compact site for such a range of facilities, and there was clearly dialogue around what should be contained within the new Olympia. And I know that particularly the issue of should there or shouldn't be a wave pool had an impact on the design, and certainly the compactness of the space available internally has resulted in what some may view as being design compromises. But overall, the design has allowed all the facilities to be included within it. Again, with the benefit of hindsight, would it have been useful to have slightly more ground? I suspect the answer would be yes. But I'm not sure whether Mr. Martin wants to add to that, but certainly invite him to come in around the procurement issue because it's his specialist area.
Yeah, Mr. Martin.
Thanks, Bailey Sawyers. Thanks, Robin. In terms of the procurement process, going back at that period of time, 10, 12 years, there was certainly less flexibility and choice of procurement routes than there is today. My other observation would be in terms of the marketplace and how any client engages with a design team and a developer have evolved over that period of time. So the reality is the same option as we chose to procure the pool back then is still available now, but there are several other options that could be looked at. And I think any time that you're choosing a procurement option, you need to look at it at the point in time that you're doing it, the market conditions, the availability of internal, external staff, the performance of design teams, the performance of consultants, availability of supply chain, and take all that into account before you assess and make any recommendations for what procurement route you would choose. Having said all that, on that basis, I think as time's moved on and you've progressed, some of the frameworks that are in the marketplace today would be a good choice, and particularly that add other values to public sector bodies in terms of key performance indicators, and particularly things like local labour and community wealth and such like. But that said, that doesn't mean that one procurement route will guarantee you success over another, and it's still about the quality of all the team from a client, contractor and design side to produce a successful project.
Yeah. Any more questions, Willie?
Not at the moment, thanks.
Okay, I'm not sure if Bailey McPherson's back in or Councillor Shaw.
I certainly am.
Okay.
I don't know, does
Councillor Shaw, are you?
Yes,
you
Lynn
good to go?
was.
Okay, Fraser, you go for it.
Okay.
Sorry, Lynn, I'll come back to you.
Okay, can I just check, convener, I'm on a different device. I think it seems to be okay. Certainly my picture's a lot better. I'm very conscious that what my way to ask may have been asked, because obviously, as you'll appreciate, is both Councillor Short and I have had some internet Wi-Fi problems this afternoon. And so my question really, and jump in if it's been asked, my question really follows on from the exchange with Bailey Scott a little bit earlier in relation to relative humidity. And it goes back to the comment in the Paul Hackett report, page 657 onwards of the tome of papers that we have enjoyed reading. It indicates that the recommendation of 3 professional bodies concerned with the running of swimming pools is that the pool hall ventilation should keep relative humidity at some 55 to 65%. I think that's alluded to on page 663. And yet at times, relative humidity at the Olympia was between 68 and 82%, according to that report from 2017, leading to condensation on surfaces and potentially accelerating corrosion. Now, Mr. Martin indicated in his response to Bailey Scott that city development may not have fully agreed with that commentary, if I understood Mr. Martin correctly. And I was just really wondering, first of all, is it known the extent to which prior to 2017 relative humidity levels were not conforming to good practice? And I realise that some of the officers that would have known that may not actually be there now, but I'm asking the question anyway. What did Mr. Martin mean by maybe not fully agreeing with the commentary? And also, has the issue around relative humidity, what was it as a result of the Hackett report conforming to good practice at all times after 2017?
Anyone able to respond? Mr. Presswood.
Chair, I was just going to say that really all of those questions are out with my my professional background, so I'll ask Mr. Martin to jump in as far as he can.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Martin.
Thanks, convener. Thanks, Bailey McPherson. I'll go with the simple one first, particularly the comment that I made earlier, and I think it's really in relation to the comment about this is probably in order to reduce electrical costs, what it says in the paragraph. And having investigated and discussed with officers, and clearly they weren't there, there's no specific reason why the controls seem to be working at the maximum output of 82 degrees, hence why they were put back to the default settings.
Right.
So it wasn't to reduce energy costs, is basically what I'm saying is the case.
Right, that really wasn't though what I was asking. I suppose my question really was, so it wasn't the case that the department disagreed with the contention that the relative humidity should be between 55 and 65, whereas it had been running at the max, as you correctly indicate. Was that corrective action then taken after the Paul Hackett report in 2017, and are officers confident that the relative humidity conformed with the recommendations of professional bodies after the Paul Hackett report recommendations were implemented?
Yeah, thanks for clarifying. That's something that is currently working on, and you've heard me speak about the ventilation specialist as well as the pool consultant. So in terms of the monitoring and measuring of that, and again, partly down to the hours of use, the numbers of people that are in the facility, obviously the actual infrastructure, the services that are in there. There's so many parameters that go into what could potentially affect the humidity, and it varies over the day and reduces during the evening. So it wouldn't be possible to confirm that they've conformed since 2017 and since we've reset the controls. They may well have gone above that level during that time. But what we want to look at is there a better way that can be managed so we'll have that conforming going forward, and by reducing that relative humidity, that will then assess and have a reduced aggressive atmosphere, which will obviously assist with looking after the facility, and along with the cleaning regime going forward, give us that better level of protection.
Okay, what I don't get about, I understand the complexities and it's a complex building, and I get all that. I think we all understand that. The question I don't quite understand though is, are you saying that then after the Paul Hackett report in 2017, there wasn't actually any monitoring of relative humidity? We just don't know if his recommendation was really properly implemented, notwithstanding I fully understand the complexity of the building, but is what we were saying that that was a recommendation from that report, was it actually implemented and monitored? I suppose that's my question. I'm not saying it might have gone above occasionally or whatever, given the complexity of the building, but my fundamental question is, was that report recommendation actually, and I would presume the monitoring would be by Leisure and Culture Dundee, and was it actually monitored after that to ensure that that recommendation was, as far as is possible, actually implemented going forward from 2017?
That's something, Bailey McPherson, I don't have the detail of that to hand, and we could do further dialogue between colleagues in property and, as you suggest, Leisure and Culture, to confirm what formal monitoring was in place since 2017.
Okay, well, Leisure and Culture Dundee are on the call, so maybe they could explain what, Mrs. Dobby could maybe explain what was the monitoring arrangement in relation to humidity after the Paul Hackett report was received between 2017 and obviously the closure.
Judy, if you could make comment.
Thanks very much for the question, Bailey McPherson. I don't have the direct answer to that, but I will work with Neil and with staff on site to find out the answer. A number of staff that were key within the processes are no longer employed with LNCD, but I will find out and come back with that answer.
Okay, well, that strikes me as that really quite concerns me because, you know, I'm grateful that you'll come back, and I dare say you'll come back to the full committee. That's fine. The point to me, for me, is this: whether or not the staff are still there, I would have thought, arising out of the Paul Hackett report, there would be some bluntly written instructions in relation to some of the recommendations, because that, you know, the blindingly obvious thing is that the Hackett report gave some recommendations, and I'm just going to touch on some of the other ones in a minute. But in relation to humidity, there was a quite clear, it was quite clearly saying that we should stick to the recommendation of the professional bodies. And it would appear that neither the Council nor Leisure and Culture Dundee knows if we actually monitored that after that. And that strikes me as really quite concerning, because I would have thought it was self-evident. You get the report, you get recommendations, you implement recommendations, and then you monitor the outcome of these recommendations. So I know you can't get the answer today. I would have hoped that you would have had that answer today, because I think it's a fairly straightforward point. I suppose that then asks, I suppose leading on from that then, so the Paul Hackett report, if you look at 5.0, it's page 664 of the tome, there's a list of recommendations. Adjustment to ventilation systems to operate full capacity, installation of pool covers to reduce late evening, humidity, steel supports and synthetic truss. I could go through. I've got 8 that I've noted, and I suppose the question I've got is, were all these recommendations implemented in 2017, and where? And I presume one definitely wasn't, because one was an annual check to assess further deterioration. And the one thing that's quite clear from this, and in fact, the aquatics deputation, Dundee Aquatics deputation, Stuart Maxwell actually did allude to exactly what we've been told at committee prior, that there was no annual maintenance programme. And I would have thought that that was quite clearly a recommendation in the Paul Hackett report. Quote, annual check to assess further deterioration, although that's maybe slightly different from just annual maintenance. But the point I'm really making is, were all the recommendations of the Paul Hackett report actually implemented on receipt in 2017?
Mr. Pressman.
Chair, many thanks. I have asked the same question. We've gone through the Hackett report in detail. Each one of the recommendations was picked up and assessed by officers of Leisure and Culture Dundee, who commissioned the report, and the City Council property team. Each one of them has been considered. Not all of the recommendations were taken forward, and I think members are aware of the pool covers issue. The annual checking programme, I think members have been advised previously that there are regular checks of all City Council properties, including Olympia, so there will be maintenance checks, condition surveys carried out on a regular basis, particularly for high-profile buildings such as this. So although not everything has been implemented, everything has been considered and discussed and prioritised. So some of the items were addressed immediately, others were not accepted, and some are being picked up as part of the major capital refurbishment currently under consideration. Not sure if there's anything you'd like to add to that, Mr. Martin.
Thanks. No, nothing further to add for that response.
So some now, some then, and some not at all. It would be helpful if we could maybe just be given a resume, just going through the recommendations of, and not now, I'm happy it's a follow-up, of what were done then and were they monitored. You know, if there were recommendations that required monitoring, were they monitored? Which ones were dropped and the reason? And I fully accept there could be some that, for good reason, the City Council, Leisure and Culture Dundee decided they wouldn't take forward, and which are now being implemented. It may have also been asked, because I did drop out for a time, in terms of annual maintenance programme, have we actually got to the bottom of why there was not and never an annual maintenance closure period, which, if I recall correctly, was always the case with the old Olympia, that there was a sort of closed down period for annual maintenance. Why did we get into a position where that wasn't the case?
Yeah, Mr. Pressman.
Yeah, many thanks. I think to address the first point, we're very happy to do that analysis of the Hackett report. We had proposed that we would bring that back as part of the Olympia report that was previously requested by committee. So that will be included within that, as well as addressing a number of the other points that have been raised by members today. So we've got a clear view as to the structure and content of that report. And if possible, we would bring that back at the same time as the tender report to allow members to make that judgment in the round. The issue, the second issue which you raised, if you just give me a prompt.
It was about annual maintenance, Robin. Sorry, yeah.
Annual maintenance. My understanding is, and again, I'll ask Mr. Martin to come in. My understanding is that the new building was designed in such a way that annual maintenance wouldn't necessarily be required. Since then, we've obviously identified a significant number of issues that require addressing, and we are having discussions with Leisure and Culture Dundee about the possible introduction of a future annual maintenance check to ensure that issues or future annual maintenance closure to deal with things on a rolling basis rather than on an accumulation basis with significant closures in the future. But Mr. Martin, I'd be happy if you would come in and supplement that.
Thanks, Billy McPherson. Thanks, Robin. Yeah, you're quite right, Billy McPherson. My understanding was there was a yearly closure of the original Olympia prior to Christmas in relation to servicing the boilers, and that gave the opportunity to carry out some other maintenance measures on an annual basis. And in the report we did in December, that was addressed. And from the point of view of going forward, that I think what we need to look at is that in terms of the building and the importance for the city, that we need to look at that regime going forward. And it may be that we'll have a small annual closure, and whether we'll have a periodic closure greater than that in every 3 years or 5 years or what have you. I think it's appropriate to look at that so everybody's aware of what we're doing, how we're looking after the property, and also, more importantly, can plan for any potential closure, and also if clubs and other users have to be displaced for a short period of time, and then we're doing it in a planned manner.
Yeah, just briefly, just really in relation to the comment Mr. Presswood made about, it was anticipated when Olympia opened in 2013 that an annual maintenance check, it was built in such a way that wasn't required. Was that conforming to some form of industry practice or standard, or was that on the advice of Mansell, who constructed it, or why did we think that we did not need an annual maintenance check and brief closure, given that we'd done that, as Mr. Martin confirmed, we'd done that at the previous building without any difficulty for a great many years.
Chair, I'll ask Mr. Martin to come in, but my understanding is that because of new plant and technologies, there was no requirement for frequent closures. So it was a design thing rather than something which was introduced by the contractor. Annual service closures are not only applicable to maintenance of plant, but also provide an opportunity for activities such as deep clean and minor work. So we absolutely understand it. I think Mr. Martin has highlighted the benefits of that, which we're reviewing with LCD. But my understanding is it was our decision as the client and the designer that we did not require an annual maintenance closure, rather than something which the contractor has suggested to us. But could you clarify, Mr. Martin?
Thanks, Billy McPherson. Thanks, Robin. Yeah, I think the philosophy was more about a periodic closure with over a period of time, so nothing on an annual basis, and it would be when there was significant plant that would need replaced, and then one would assume that anticipation was that some other maintenance items could be carried out at that time. But I think clearly on the basis of how well used it is and the circumstances that we're discussing today, an alternative strategy is appropriate to be considered and put in place going forward.
Okay, I know it's the benefit of hindsight, but with the benefit of hindsight, quite clearly, there's merit in an annual maintenance check and closure, and clearly that will have to be addressed. And you know, I think it's something that would just be sensible going forward, and I think that seems to be the consensus. But I'm grateful for these responses.
Okay, Councillor Short.
Hello.
Go for it.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I kind of think I've lost the trail, but basically it was about the ways that we approach things now compared to the way that we approached them this year. I think we've had more investment, we've had more time involved, and it's just about the whole culture of how we look at the relationships that are existing now and the symbiosis between leisure and culture and city development. Because obviously we've got a whole new number of things for everybody, from the chief executive to the executive directors to the officers, are all completely different from where we've come from in 2014. So it's just to get an understanding of how officers can articulate whether they see a sea change in the way that we look at things.
Mr. Presswood.
Chair, I'm happy to address that, and also to pick up the point that Councillor Short made earlier about the SIPFA report, and I think her memory is better than mine, though I am aware of it. I think, to answer the last point, I think relations are good with Leisure and Culture Dundee. There's a number of formal liaison mechanisms, and we do work jointly to plan any kind of work. We're currently working on the new office premises for Leisure and Culture Dundee. We're planning major investment at the ice rink around the plant and machinery there. So there's a good collaboration between two services, and I'm sure Judy and Neil could elaborate on that further. In terms of the point that Councillor Short has made about improving our investment in the current asset base, I think this has been a theme for officers and elected members, certainly in the time that I've been here. We need to invest in our current assets rather than simply focusing on the creation of new assets. So the SIPFA report, which we referred to, did look at benchmarking expenditure on repairs and maintenance between Dundee and benchmark councils. And I think it's fair to say that we, at that time, weren't investing to the level that might have been required to meet the needs of our operational property portfolio. Now, as members are aware, we've made considerable progress in the property rationalisation over the past 3 years. We've closed quite a large number of properties, and that obviously means that the maintenance budget is spread over a smaller number of properties, which is helpful in terms of benchmarking. The council has also invested significantly in additional funding for repairs and maintenance, consistent with that desire to maintain the asset base more effectively. So in 1920, we received an additional 699,000 revenue funding for property repairs and maintenance. Some of that was to directly provide a budget for the V&A, because again, another large complex M&E within that building, but a general provision of 449,000 for repairs and maintenance. The following year, an additional 550,000 invested in the property budget. And then finally, on top of that, investment within the capital budget to allow us to do these one-off capital projects like the ice rink, like the future investment in DCA, etc., etc. So I do think that we're on the right track in terms of expenditure levels on repairs and maintenance. To be absolutely candid, we could always spend more. If elected members at budget time are able to invest more, we could spend more, but I absolutely understand that the City Council is under immense financial pressure, so we do need to restrict our aspirations, but I believe that we've made substantial progress in getting to the right level of repairs and maintenance expenditure.
Okay, Councillor Short, have you got supplementary?
No, that's fine just now. Thank you. Appreciate it. And thank you for your patience.
You're more than welcome. Councillor McCready, are you looking to come back in?
Yeah, it's kind of linked to that, and if I can draw attention to, I think it's just one example of page 738 at the bottom of that page, and also I think to the some of the comments made by Mr. Maxwell in the deputation that we heard, and some of the discussion that we've just heard in the last couple of minutes around the relationship between Leisure and Culture Dundee, the City Council and City Development in particular as the body responsible for property management. And so, I mean, I think we've heard that we think it's getting better, or we think it's okay now, but I do wonder if disputes between Leisure and Culture Dundee and Dundee City Council over responsibility for various things have helped or hindered what's going on here. And is there an issue around the arm's length nature of Leisure and Culture Dundee that means that it gets or has or in the past got a poor service from Dundee City Council? And also, I think we need to balance the financial benefit of essentially of not paying rates on the Leisure and Culture Dundee properties as opposed to whatever the final outcome of the additional cost here. I think we need to start thinking about all that sort of stuff and bringing that together, because we need to look at the bigger picture and make sure that we're doing this correctly. Because I think we see on page 738 somebody who's redacted has written to Dundee City Council indicating that the response was unacceptable because they were trying to say that Leisure and Culture Dundee had responsibility for certain works, and Leisure and Culture Dundee didn't think that. And I think we also saw that in the Freedom of Information stuff that was reported in the Courier, and we saw, as Mr. Maxwell said earlier, we saw Councillor Dawson valiantly making the case for Leisure and Culture Dundee, and whether there was real progress or not, I suppose would be for others to judge.
Mr. Pressman.
Chair, I'm happy to give my perspective on things, but obviously I don't have that full 10-year vision which the Leisure and Culture Dundee minutes share. But I do think relations are good and continuing to improve. I think that the point that Councillor McCready has highlighted about the distinction between the arm's length partner and the council is perhaps an important one to consider at another time. And I know Mrs. Dobby will wish to come in on that. We're getting visibility here of one part of the council. I think we don't get visibility of the demands and the dialogue that takes place between the council occupiers. And it would be clear to me that we need to have a consistent approach to property maintenance, whether it's LCD as an arm's length part of the council, or whether it's communities around community centres or education and children services around schools. So do I think that we have supported LCD adequately? Yes, I do. I think there's a formal process within LCD for escalating and discussing these kind of issues, which potentially doesn't exist in other parts of the council. But overall, there will always be tensions around how much we should invest in any building in council ownership, including council services, including LCD. I was in dialogue this morning with the team about Dundee House and the need for tidying up and repainting the staff entrance, etc., etc. So these dialogues always take place. We always need to prioritise expenditure, and we try and do so after dialogue with whoever's occupying the building, whether it's LCD or another service of the council. But I can see that Mrs. Dobby wants to come in to supplement that.
Okay, Judy.
Thanks, convener. I think it's fair to say that it was a huge challenge at the beginning when we first became Leisure and Culture Dundee, for both staff in Leisure and Culture and for the council to look at what the implications were of becoming an arm's length organisation and taking on charitable status. So over the early years, I think there were challenges for both sides into how we needed to be viewed. But I think what we've done and we've recognised is that we need to make clear communication and strengthen our relationships, and I think we've done that. We have a huge portfolio of buildings that we manage on behalf of the council, and again, as Robin's pointed out, of the vast majority of things that we operate and requests that we make between each other operate very smoothly. So I think we're all focused on learning lessons from what we've been through over the past few years with reference to the Olympia, and making sure we're in the right position to challenge it. But at the end of the day, whether we work for Leisure and Culture Dundee or we work for the City Council, we all want the best for the public and the customers, and we will do everything in our power to make sure that we get that.
Thanks for that, Chief Executive. Looking to come in.
Yeah, thanks, convener. Just to echo what Robin and Judy have said, my view is that we can continue to develop and grow the partnership further, and my aspiration for that is that we do so. I also believe that having Mrs. Dobby as part of the council management team, and with a dotted line report to myself and also to the Chair of Leisure and Culture Dundee, that if there are any ongoing issues that cannot be resolved between service directors, then there's a clear route to escalate those, so that we can work on how we work together to make sure that we deliver and protect the assets, which are ultimately delivering and helping the people within the city and contributing to the overall council and city objectives. So it's just to give that assurance that that framework and structure is in place, and it's certainly my vision that we continue to build on what I think is an effective partnership at the moment, but I do think, as in all areas, we could continue to aspire to do better. Thanks, convener.
Thanks for that. Councillor McCready.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, convener. I mean, I'm really pleased to hear, particularly Mrs. Dobby's impassioned kind of plea to kind of serve the people of Dundee. It's a shame that the closure of Olympia is currently preventing her from doing all that the way that she would really like to do. But I think that's very good to hear.
Yeah, thanks. I agree with you. Can I maybe ask the SIPFA report if that could be circulated to the committee? I think it would be useful to reflect on that in relation to this particular project. How obviously it was highlighted before that we weren't spending quite what we could on maintenance. Then it would be useful to reflect on the working of that document. You know, and in light of obviously spends like Dundee House as well. So, you know, I think if that could be circulated, and can I maybe ask a question before I bring Billy Scott in relation to we could always do a bit more in maintenance. Do we consider, now that we know about the building, if there would have been a much more robust maintenance regime, that we may well have saved some of the substantial spend that needs to be done in bringing the building back to good health? Mr. Presswood?
Chair, you're inviting me to speculate, and for understandable reasons, I'm keen not to do so. I think it is inevitable that there would have been a major closure period. I think we had been planning that, I think, since 2019 with Leisure and Culture Dundee to work out what the optimum time for that. It is regrettable that an emergency closure precluded that planned closure. If we had spent more money on the building, could it have diminished the content of the planned closure capital works? Potentially. I really don't know to what extent. It certainly would not have prevented the requirement for the planned closure, which we're now working towards.
Okay, I'll maybe come back with a few questions later, but if the SIPFA report could be circulated, that would be good. I'll bring in Bailey Scott.
It was just, again, following on from the questions posed by Bailey McPherson about the implementation and monitoring of the recommendations from the Hackett report. I just wondered where that would have gone to for consideration, because I've had a quick flick through the minutes, again, of the minutes of the Health and Safety Management Group following the date of the report. and I don't see any mention of it. And I'm assuming that they would have gone there for consideration and they would have taken a view on it. So just wondered who the report was shared with at the time of its being produced.
Are you able to make a comment, Mr. Pressman?
I think the question relates to the Leisure and Culture Dundee committee, so potentially Mrs. Dobby can answer, but I think from my reading there was reference to it in one of the minutes.
You want to answer, Judy?
I will go back and double check the materials that we have to see if there's a chain of where that document went. I haven't been able to establish who it was circulated to in the first instance, but I will make sure that I find out and come back.
Okay. Can I maybe ask a few questions? Well, obviously we've got a fastener that's 10mm diameter that's sheared, and we're replacing it with a stainless steel fastener, and we're replacing it with a carbon steel 8.8 tensile steel. What was the rationale in the choice? And given that we know that there is considerable humidity, chances are different types of materials, what is the chance of an electrolytic reaction being part of the problem? And being a further part of the problem as you change the specification of materials?
Chair, I'll ask the city engineer to handle that as far as he can.
Thank you. In terms of you're talking about sacrificial corrosion where two dissimilar materials meet together.
Yeah.
The solution for the bolt failure is to replace with carbon steel, and that will be painted. Paint provides a barrier to electrolytic corrosion because it requires electrolytic corrosion would require two metallic materials to be in contact with each other, where the paint and a neoprene washer would prevent that from happening.
Yeah. So you know, obviously if you're running up and down the thread, you'll remove some of the paint. So I take it it's painted once it goes into place.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. So you have a factory applied paint system. You then have a site applied correction to where that's engaged on the threads.
Okay. And can I maybe ask another question? It's been known for some considerable time that nylon deteriorates with UV light, and you know, it potentially goes brittle. And some of these fixings for lights are up with that. We replaced a number of lights in 2018 with these up with nylon fasteners. And you know, I suppose when you went to look at if that was a nylon fastener, if you went to try to unfasten it, it probably broke. So you know, it would highlight that we potentially had a bigger problem at that stage. So what were the lights that were replaced? What were they fixed with? And you know, again, what's the sort of rationale in the change from the material? And you know, how do we know build someone in knowing that there was the potential for them to go?
Do you want me to carry that one?
Yeah, thanks. If I could.
Sure. I think probably the first thing, and I know it's a bit semantics with materials, but the plastics fittings are not nylon; they're polypropylene, and to all intents and purposes, they look the same, but they behave completely differently. You're absolutely correct that if these were nylon fixings in a swimming pool environment with UV light, I would be a lot more concerned about the use of that material. They're polypropylene, which was a material which was suitable for a pool environment. In fact, looking back at some of the papers, there's quite a lot of research was done into selecting that material as being suitable for it. For a pool environment. Polypropylene doesn't suffer from UV degradation through brittlement. It also doesn't suffer from water ingress, absorbing water. So the material itself was probably suitable for the environment. I think the reason for the failure seems to be associated with the fact that the fixings were tightened at a temperature way below the pool's operating temperature, and these fixings have expanded during that period. Give you an idea that the pool was roughly constructed at about 10 degrees centigrade, and the pool operates at between 30 and 35 air temperature. That temperature difference is enough to cause 10 to 15 mil worth of expansion on these fixings, and that stress seems to have caused the issue. What the proposed and installed alternative is to use steel, again, of the same industrial pool paint specification that we've used elsewhere, and demonstrated that that works. Steel has a very, very low expansion rate, so within the bounds of the operating temperatures of the pool, it's more compatible with the environment that's working in.
How do you think it took so long for these to start breaking then, based on a temperature change, given that, you know, if it being built to become operational, that temperature would have went from its 10 degrees to 30 within a very short period of time?
It takes a while for the pool to get up to temperature, but it's a combination. I think the easiest way of explaining it is I've got a ruler here. I don't know if you can see.
Yeah.
So if you imagine that these are the fixings and they're constrained by the roof and by the cable tray, as that expands, what happens is it buckles. And when the temperature reduces, it debuckles. So there's been a load that's happened over a period of time cyclically that's caused that issue.
Stress fracture with the amount of times.
That's the consensus. I worked with Dundee University quite a bit with this process to establish that we ruled out everything else, and the only obvious solution thereafter was a thermal expansion concern.
The stud wall fixings then, are they 6 mil or 10 mil?
The stud wall, sorry, I'm not quite.
The stud wall fixings, are they 10 mil or 6 mil?
The curtain wall fixings.
Yes.
Yeah, so they're M10, they're 10 mil diameter fixings.
That's, again, is that expansion contraction that's caused that to shear?
What has happened with these is they are stainless steel. They're grade 316 stainless steel, which is suitable for swimming pool environments. These, for everyone else, these fixings effectively hold the curtain walling, which is the glazing around the envelope of the building, and these fixings transfer wind load from the curtain walling to the primary steel frame. As I say, they're made of stainless steel, which is a material that was suitable for that pool environment. However, I think the high humidity that's been identified in other parts of the report that you've got has created a microclimate, which has caused a bit of local contamination through condensation at that part of the building envelope. Stainless steel can suffer from something that's called stress corrosion cracking, which is where you get micro fissures in the material, and progressively it can crack, and it looks like a brittle fracture of the stainless steel. It happens at a very, very small percentage of its load capacity. So that's why that fixing has failed. It's a consequence of the correct material perhaps being used, but in an environment where it's a bit beyond its expected operating window. And again, the intention is to replace these bolts with the same spec mild steel bolts painted. The reason for this mild steel bolt painted solution is so we've got a consistency of material across the pool and a consistency of corrosion protection.
There's quite considerable difference in tensile strength between the mild steel and the carbon steel, isn't it? So.
Sorry, there's virtually no difference between the capacity of stainless steel and cold worked grade 8.8 volts. They're virtually like for like. They've got a tensile capacity of 500 newtons a square meter.
Okay. Did we see any metrology reports on these things, or do you just? I know your knowledge sounds very good.
Sure. I have the big advantage that the bolts are stamped with their grade on them.
Yeah. So we didn't have to go any further than.
No. Thankfully, I didn't have to get my chemistry books out and do chemical testing. Just as a background, I did used to work on the old Olympia pool, so stainless steel is a sort of a specialist mastermind subject of me.
Did we have any useful knowledge? Did we have any issues in relation to the three site materials in the old pool, or did they not exist to that extent?
We didn't really use stainless steel much in the old pool. It wasn't a material that was widely used. It's become increasingly used because it's become slightly cheaper. But back in the 70s, when the original Olympia was built, it wasn't a material that would have been commonly used.
Yeah. Let me ask another question. It's in relation to we got the car park built at the same time by the same contractor. Has there been any issues with the car park that would lead to believe that the contractor wasn't a great choice? Mr. Presswood.
I'm not aware of anything. Obviously, we've been reviewing files as part of this. I don't know whether Mr. Martin or Mr. Pedersen, as the chief architects, are aware of anything. There's certainly not anything on this scale, but perhaps Mr. Pedersen could answer.
Thank you, convener. Thank you, Robin. No, there are no issues with the car park. There were a few snagging issues and a few issues brought up during the defects period, but they were all satisfactorily addressed. Because the car park is essentially an open ventilated building, it doesn't have a lot of the conditions that Olympia unfortunately is experiencing at the moment. And its construction, by its requirements, its construction is a lot less complicated and the interfaces are a lot easier to deal with. So there have been no problems ongoing with the car park over the period of time since the end of the defects period would have originally finished.
Okay. I don't see any further questions unless anyone's looking to come in. I think we'll agree where we are on the report at the moment, and there is further reports to come in relation to cost of the building and repairs. No doubt people will be having questions to ask around that period of time as well. And we have a number of reports that we've asked for, like the SITFA report and other bits that I told people have taken notes of, and these will get circulated to the committee. So if that's well, on this item, we'll move forward. Would people like to have a 5-minute break? Yeah, so we'll go for a 5-minute break and then we'll come back on the housing one. We've had some discussion here as to whether you would want to continue. So I'm in your hands as to whether you would like to continue, or we could seek, Mr. Merry could seek an alternative date and we could come back and do the other report. I appreciate that people have now spent quite a time and we've dealt with one item. So, I notice, Fraser, you're looking to come in.
Yeah, I'm of the view that we should press on. I think, to be honest, this has taken some time to organise. We've obviously all recently read up on, a few hundred pages. Perhaps this one is slightly less 100 pages than the other one, but the point really being that I don't think we should really be, we should be leaving it. I think we should press on.
Good. So there doesn't seem to be any other different view. So happy to press on. So I'll ask Mr. Merry to say a few words on the report before we head into asking officers questions. Mr. Merry.
Thank you, convener. Again, elected members will be aware of this, but for the benefit of any members of the press and public joining the meeting, At its meeting on the 22nd of November 2021, the Policy and Resources Committee considered a report on roof tile fixings to domestic properties. At that meeting, they noted the findings of the review and the officers had concluded that the roof installations in the period under consideration did not meet best practices set out in British standards. They approved works to be undertaken to bring the affected roofs up to the standard recommended in British standards at an estimated cost of £4.4 million. They noted the corrective action and compliance monitoring measures set in place to ensure specification, execution and managing of construction works undertaken to appropriate industry standards in the future. Noted that as part of a corporate, legislative and regulatory update assignment being carried out by internal audit, current arrangements in place within the Design and Property Division, Construction Services and Housing would be reviewed to ensure that relevant new or changed legislative and regulatory requirements were identified and, where appropriate, addressed timelessly. Required officers to obtain an independent and external view to provide assurance that any and all failures identified within the report and any subsequent findings that stemmed from the report were fully and unquestionably addressed. They instructed officers to provide a detailed overview of how the corrective actions detailed in the report differed from those undertaken during the roofing work, and they noted that the report would be referred to a future scrutiny committee, which is the reason for this item being on the agenda today. By way of context, can I explain that 25 contracts were not completed in compliance with BS 5534 by Dundee City Council. Of those 25 contracts, there are two variants. Variant number 1 is where there was consistent contract documentation, but the works were not completed to the British standard. And an example of variant 1 is Cleppington Road Phase 1. Variant 2 is where there was inconsistent contract documentation and works were not completed to British standard. An example there is Camperdown Second Development Phase 2. In addition, and for comparison and assurance purposes, relevant documentation has been enclosed for St Mary's 10th Development Phase 3, demonstrating the enhanced, consistent information now provided as outlined in the committee report I previously referred to. Also included in the bundle of documents are the completion documentation for final sign-off of Variant 1 and Variant 2 contracts. Again, this information has been provided to aid members in their scrutiny of this particular issue, and officers would invite questions. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, thanks for that. Looks Billy McPherson, let me come in.
So if I can just unmute myself. Thank you, Mr. Many. My question, I have a couple of questions initially in relation to Report 335/2021. One is in relation to the cost of the necessary work to put this on a proper footing. And the report in November 2021 suggests 4.4 million, taking into account an allowance for general price inflation, etc., over the 30 months of the project. Now, at the time of the report coming in November 2021, the then current key budget assumptions for material costs and plant hire were both at 3%. And clearly, in view of recent inflation and general increases in costs of building materials, in fact, I've seen some information about some building materials over the last 12 months have increased by up to 23%. And quite clearly, CPI is currently sitting at, well, last month it was sitting at 5.5%. Construction price inflation is clearly hugely higher than that. And given that, has the council assessed the impact of inflationary pressures on the project since that report went to committee in November? In other words, are we remotely confident that £4.4 million is the correct figure? Because I have some concerns that, in fact, there will be financial impacts as a result of inflationary pressures.
Someone from finance able to answer that, Chief Executive?
Yeah, thanks, convener, and thanks, Bailey McPherson, for the question. If I can just ask Louise Butcher to respond, and perhaps Neil Martin, who have been working on the specification and costings for the project. I think they'll be able to respond to this, but I know Mr Emmett's also on the call if needed, convener. Louise?
Yeah, thank you, Greg, and thank you, Bailey McPherson. The 4.4 million includes a projected index per year, an attempt to ensure a robust projected cost. And you'll note in the report, we accounted for a 50% sacrificial in terms of the tiles coming off the roof and going on. That's still to be tested when we're on the roof. So it's been projected at a higher percent that we suspect the tiles will be sacrificial, and actually what we anticipate when we go on site, that it will be lower.
I get that about the tiles. What I don't get is about the assumptions in relation to material costs, plant hire, and so on, because it does give the current assumption at 3% in report 335/2021. Can you be confident at all that 3% is realistic, given that this is going to take, I think I'm correct saying, 30 months to do? Construction inflation is very significant. And I just really wonder if that 3%, I get your point about the tiles, but I just really wonder if that 3% is remotely, it may well have been a reasonable assumption in November 2021, but is it a reasonable assumption in March 2022 going forward on a 30-month contract?
I think at this point, Bailey McPherson, we're engaging with the market around the purchase of the tiles and the products that will require to do the installation. So what we'll see very shortly is if there is any change on the anticipated and projected costs, that they will come forward at that time, now that we're engaged with the manufacturers for the purchase.
Okay, well, that's fine, except for the fact, what I don't think, for those of us that return after the 5th of May, what I don't want to see is a report coming to us in June, July, saying, well, actually, 4.4 million, it wasn't 4.4 million, because this whole thing, plus the Olympia, has been reputationally damaging enough as it is. And for the 4.4 million to go in a northern direction would be really concerning from my perspective. Whilst it's not the council's fault if material costs, inflation, plant hire inflation is very significant, it is the council's responsibility to ensure that in saying how much this is actually going to cost to put right, it actually does cost that. And I really do think we should be upfront with people and say, are we really confident that this is actually going to be delivered for the 4.4 million? The figure has been bandied about so much in the media and so on. I think it would be further reputationally damaging if we had a situation where it came in a whole lot more than that.
Bring in the Chief Executive.
Yeah, thanks, convener. Thanks, Bailey McPherson. What I can give you an assurance is that once we've got cost certainty as best we can, we will alert elected members to that. I should say there are a number of external factors that the council will have no control over. However, as Louise has outlined, there are some assumptions that we may be erring on the side of caution. So once we have got certainty, hopefully within the next few weeks, we can report that back to elected members. And if there is a need, and we will not know that at this time, to bring back a further report, then we will have to do that. But I can give that assurance that we will work hard to deliver on budget, but recognising there are external factors that may be out with our control that we will just not be able to manage. But we will give early indication as soon as we've got certainty to elected members. Thanks, convener.
Yeah, I had a follow-up question, but I saw Mr. Emmett had his hand up, so I don't know if he's wanting in on the back of what the Chief Executive had to say, or should I just press on?
Just press on. It looks like the Chief Executive answered that.
Okay, I'll press on, and that's really about the point again in 335/2021, which in talking about the background talks about the change in the standard in 2015, and I suppose what I don't. What I can't get a complete handle on from the documentation. It's great if you want details of roof tiles and such like. What's not quite so clear from that is that was a major revision in British standards. In 2015, who, and I'm not meaning an individual, I'm meaning a job title, who within construction services was allocated responsibility for the assimilation of new regulations. And knowing that this was a major change to these regulations, what were the arrangements back in 2015 to inform and train appropriate staff for changes in working practices, particularly major revisions of building standards?
And we'll respond. Greg, Chief Exec.
Thanks, convener. So if I can, I think it would be helpful just to bring in Louise at this point, and depending on Bailey McPherson's views, it might be helpful to bring in Neil Martin also, given that the question may be pertinent to city development as well, but I'll let Bailey McPherson determine whether or not that would be helpful, convener. So Louise.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Thanks, Bailey McPherson. In terms of the controls in place to ensure changes in standards were highlighted and circulated, I know there were gaps in processes that I think would have prevented these from being identified in the delivery of this work stream. In terms of construction services management, required to ensure that changes such as these are communicated and that staff have access to reference material to monitor and implement changes. I'm aware that there was a key change in staff throughout 2014, just before the change came in, and those changes were quite key when we think about the operational delivery for this particular work stream. Also recognise as well that throughout the period of 2015 and 2020, some might say instability across the construction services management team, which again I think could have contributed to the dissemination of this key change. So to reassure members, we've now started to rectify this through the permanent appointment of key management posts and a review of the overall structure here at Construction Services. I do recognise that construction services have good working relationships with their manufacturers, although this change was never highlighted through the channel. Nonetheless, I think controls should be in place to ensure any change is communicated regardless of that relationship and how good it is. I note that sector reference materials such as industry libraries, where there are live updates recorded around British standards being but just one of the elements within that was not available to construction services staff at that time. This has now been rolled out to ensure that appropriate staff across the service can review standards and keep on top of changes. I think construction services, the check-in processes and procedures for design and specification, I wasn't imposed at the time, but I've got concerns as to whether they were robust enough to allow for a thorough review of the requirements and standards before commencing work on this work stream. But again, this has now been reviewed and changes have been implemented, and we continue to monitor those controls through our executive and steering partnership groups. So just to conclude, I think there's years worth of experience within the installation teams who installed the roofs in line with their training associated to their trade. All roofing projects were completed, snagged and accepted, and I think this agreed handover process for a very linear, repetitive programme continued to reinforce this existing working practice, taking account of what I've also just said.
Okay, thanks for that. I don't know, does Mr. Martin want to add to that at all from a city development perspective before I come back?
Thanks, Convener. Thanks, Billy McPherson. I wouldn't at this stage. I'll wait till you come in with further questions. Thanks. Okay,
Matt. Okay. Obviously, a lot of what Louise spoke about there were the corrective actions, and you know we can read in report 335 2021 from in 5.3 the corrective actions that were taken, and whilst it's reassuring to know now that you know clerks of works now check over specification and construction drawings prior to site start, and will liaise with the site manager, etc., all the sort of good practice that should have been in case. What's blindingly obvious, I think, to all of us was that leaving aside stability or otherwise in the management team, someone has to take responsibility for these things. And it strikes me that in 2015, we had a situation where, to be frank, it's quite clear there was sort of poor departmental organisation. Listen, I'm going to swipe at people that are here today, because I think corrective actions have been taken, but there appears to have been a sort of lack of focused responsibility for the identification of changes in industry standards, a lack of ownership. Well, there were quite clearly a lack of ownership for the assimilation and dissemination of relevant new industry standards, the lack of a cascade training system to ensure that all staff that were needed to be aware were aware, and the lack of a CPD system within the departments at the time, which has led, well, in very large measure to what ended up happening. If you don't tell people, or it doesn't, or it filters in a haphazard or not at all fashion, then we'll end up with a, you know, a 4 million plus disaster on our hands. And I suppose my question in a way maybe is around how does the council in a general sense ensure that we, in our general sort of situations in other areas within the council. Now, we have an audit regime, obviously, but my concern is, sure, we have come across a very significant and costly error in relation to the roofing of housing. But are we confident that changes to standards across the council generally are robust in the way that, frankly, they weren't robust in this particular area in 2015? And I have little doubt, you know, I think we've all a lot of confidence in Louise Butcher and her colleagues. I have no doubt that as a result of, and they weren't in post at the time this happened, but the point I make is that if this could happen here, could it happen elsewhere? I suppose that's my fundamental question. You know, it's really shocking that the council had a situation where there was such a, to be honest, a lack of, it really comes down to a poor departmental organisation and a lot of changes within that organisation and nobody taking a handle on things. But I suppose my question, it's really, I suppose, for the Chief Executive, who's already got his hand up, and that is, we really need some reassurance that we've not got another one of these down the road in another department. Do we have a robust system in a holistic sense across the council for ensuring that changes in regulation, however it might be an entirely different area of work, nothing to do with construction, but are we confident that this couldn't happen again?
Yeah, thanks, convener, and thanks, Bailey McPherson, for the question. I think, as you have acknowledged, it's difficult to look back, and certainly when quite a lot of people who are on the call weren't in those particular posts. And I think that's why it's important, as Louise has outlined, and also what's in the report, around these specific issues, to give assurance about what steps have been done. What I instructed once I was aware of this as Chief Executive was the internal audit review, which will report back to the April Scrutiny Committee about looking at that assurance to give me and also to elected members about taking a number of areas and checking and verifying whether or not we have robust procedures in place. Now, that will come back to committee, and there are always things that we can improve on. And I think you'll get some assurance when Scrutiny see that report, just around the breadth and range of controls we've got, but also potentially highlighting areas we can further strengthen those areas. I also think it's important that we take assurance in some areas from some of the external scrutiny that's placed on us. And an example of that might be from a financial control perspective around the application of regulatory or financial changes when Audit Scotland are coming in to audit the accounts. So I'd like to think we will take a number of approaches to this. The first one will be the internal audit report, and then after that, going forward, our internal audit plan for 22-23, which is based on risk, will outline areas that potentially we want to take that further deep dive into, so that we can keep this under review and have that assurance provided to Council as well as myself to Chief Executive.
Okay, that's reassuring, Mr. Colgan. I wouldn't underestimate. I mean, this whole issue and the Olympia have real resonance with the Dundee public, and I've had constituents basically saying this is reputationally damaging for the council. Could it happen elsewhere? And I think we do have to send a clear signal that all steps have been taken to ensure that this cannot happen again, that we cannot of a situation where, frankly, poor organisation and management results in key information not finding its way to where it had to find it in order that a job is done in a satisfactory and compliant manner. So I'm grateful for the reassurance. Obviously, elected members will be keeping a very close eye on the situation going forward, and obviously we'll look forward to the internal audit report, as you allude to. Thank you.
Yeah. Councillor McCready.
Yeah, I mean, I was similar to the point made by Bailey McPherson. I mean, I think there is, you know, there is clearly a communication failure here, and you know, we need to be certain that that's not a systemic failure across the council. You know, and we also, you know, we also have seen this one, the Olympia, Dundee House, and things like that, and all in pretty quick succession, and we need to be certain, you know, that you know that the council is just being unlucky and that there isn't a kind of systemic failure. And it's difficult to get to that point. I understand that, so I think it's important that we do open up to that scrutiny, and I think it's good that that report will go to the scrutiny committee in April. Look forward to seeing that. I also just wanted to refer to the report that was commissioned as a result of the Policy and Resources Committee on the 22nd of November. It was commissioned at item 5 in the recommend in what was agreed that night, that there would be that there would be an independent and external view in addition to the internal audit process, and it says that that there would be an update on progress by the end of February 2022. I'm just wondering what the update is on progress for that report.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. If I can just answer that question. So, Councillor McCready, PricewaterhouseCoopers have been appointed to carry out that independent review and have a specification which was agreed through Corporate Services, City Development and Neighbourhood Services. And my understanding is Mr Emmett sent that update around all elected members, I think potentially around the either end of February or start of March. But that work is now underway, with information that has been submitted to Scrutiny Committee today also being shared, and I'm aware that their interview is currently being carried out with staff groups, and we'll report that information and the results of that independent review back to the relevant committee once it's been finalised.
Mr Merry's going to make a comment as well. Councillor McCready.
Thanks, Convener. Just to add to what Mr Colgan has already said, Councillor McCready and members of the Scrutiny Committee, PwC were invited to the meeting this afternoon and are currently on the call.
No, that's yeah, that's very helpful. I may have thought that the update meant a bit more than we've appointed them and we've told you who they are, but we'll let that one pass, perhaps. I mean, I think I think the question, my other question was just around what recourse any, particularly any owner occupier might have, or indeed any tenant might have. Have we got any concerns that, other than the remedial works being carried out at the cost to the council, that owners or tenants have any other recourse which might cost the council money?
You respond to that, Mr Merry?
I'm happy to do that, Convener. Councillor McCready, that question has been asked of me by officers. You'll understand, for reasons which you alluded to yourself earlier on this afternoon, that any legal advice I give to the council is private and confidential. But can I say that my advice on that particular point has been accepted by all officers and action has been taken accordingly.
Okay, thanks. I may pursue that elsewhere, but thank you.
Any further question? Bring in Billy Scott.
Sorry, thank you. It says in the report that it would be usual, if there was to be a change in the tile to be used, that the architect would direct the contractor to contact the manufacturer for information on its installation. If that had happened, would the manufacturer would have made it clear that the number of fixings that would be required? And did that not happen because there wasn't a change in the type of tile that was being used?
Will you be able to respond to that? Mr. Colgan?
Yeah, thanks, convener. If I can ask Louise to come in firstly and potentially Mr. Martin also to supplement the response if needed, convener. Louise?
Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you, Greg, and thank you, Bailey Scott. Just to clarify from a construction services perspective, so I will bring Neil in from the design. Construction services have typically used two manufacturers between 2015 to 2020 for roof tiles. To clarify, the manufacturer's recommendations in terms of the fixing specification does refer to BS 5534 fixing requirements. The clipping mechanisms between the two suppliers do differ, but nonetheless, the outcome remains that in line with those recommendations, all tiles should be mechanically fixed as referred to within BS 5534. So if we could maybe bring Neil in around that communication between the recommendations and informing then the design process.
Neil?
Thanks, convener. Thanks, Bailey Scott. Thanks, Louise. So I think in terms of the design process, and this comes down to meeting procurement compliance, at the design stage, it's an output spec. So the designer won't state what the manufacturer is, and that's to allow an open market competition for the various brands to compete for the works. So once that competition has taken place to be the supplier to construction services and the appointment is then made, it's then appropriate for construction services to liaise with the manufacturer to get the specific technical information and the fixing type for that specific site, the geographical location, and agree exactly what that is. Once that information is then received, that's then given to the designer, assessed, and that's then incorporated into the contract drawings. So essentially, in terms of which manufacturer, which tile, it comes back to the same thing, that they maybe differ slightly, but they've all to comply with the BS in the same, to perform in the same manner.
Okay. And when it comes to tendering for the work and the contracts that were given to construction services were all negotiated contracts, would it have made any difference if it was the whole process was tendered? Would different documents have been prepared which would have specified the roof tile fixings, or because it's negotiated contracts, would the same paperwork and specifications have been used on subsequent contracts rather than preparing something fresh if it was going out to a tendering process, which then would have indicated the changes to BS 5334?
Someone able to respond? Neil?
Thanks, convener. Thanks, Bailey Scott. So in terms of all works that the council engage, or city development design engage with construction services or any other private sector contractor under a procurement route, there's standard documentation in terms of how the drawings are produced, specifications, bills of quantities if it's a traditional route. So the documentation is identical, irrespective of which contractor, whether it's in-house or external, are utilised for construction projects.
Okay. And the last question I have is in respect of other works carried out by construction services over that period, because other types of works will have been would have seen changes to the relevant British standards, and are we satisfied that no other works different from the roof fixings have been carried out, but not to the standards that are of the British standards set down?
Yep, thank you, Bill.
Louise?
Thanks, Chair. What I would say is we've carried out a review ourselves, and what we do know is that our gas teams, for example, and our electrical teams, there's required industry sector memberships that are mandatory, one with NIC, EIC and Gas Safe. And part of those industry sector memberships inform a yearly audit of practice carried out. So they'll literally come in and meet with the teams, review our documentation, go out on site and monitor our practice. And another element of that is they will highlight fundamental changes required. So again, we've got reassurance that we have captured in particular those higher risk work streams. As I touched on earlier though, there's additional measures that we've put in place across construction to make sure this is fully captured moving forth, for example, in terms of the roofing works.
Okay, can I ask one last question, Convener? The person who signed off the certificate of practical completion, would that have been the same person who would have signed off, been the relevant person for signing off the building warrants? And presumably the building warrants would have specified that the tile fixings would have to conform with BS 5334.
Convener, if I can just ask Mark to come in for that question.
Neil.
Thanks, Convener. Thanks, Billy Scott. No, it's not the same individual. The building standard is separate from the actual designers. It would be the architectural services that would sign off under the contract, the practical completion certificate, based on the site information from the contractor and the clerk of works.
Okay, right. Thank you.
To make a comment myself, you know, obviously the council strap line is changing for the future. And I don't think there was any member of the public was hoping that we would change in the direction of costing them £10 million on issues that we've needed to address, and one perhaps due to not having the relevant staff to disseminate information through the organisation. So when the Chief Executive does that review, I wonder if he'd be able to advise where the gaps have been, or advise council where the gaps have been and what we've done to overcome them. It's like a lean service review, but picking up the bits that where we're dropping the ball. I'm hoping that something like that would happen. I'll let you come in, Greg.
Thanks, Convener. So the external review will highlight where the failings occurred, and what we've tried to do at this point within the committee report is put in recommendations and improvements to ensure that that doesn't happen again. There may, however, be further recommendations from PricewaterhouseCoopers that will be reported to committee, and obviously officers will give consideration and look to implement those. I'll also be looking at further assurances that I can provide to committee about how we continue to monitor regulatory and any legislative updates, and I'm happy to include that when the report goes forward to committee so that that assurance can be given to elected members.
Thanks for that. I mean, kind of a believer in a stitch in time would save 9, and you know, given that, you know, in education we saved £1 million in transport by having a couple of other employees making sure the policy was correctly implemented. I wonder if with a few more people employed, disseminating information through the organisation, we would have been in a position where we wouldn't have spent £4 million or over £4 million. Yeah. I've also, like others, got real concerns about the building cost and inflation. Fuel charges are a potential 20% fuel surcharge just on getting the material to site. And depending on where these things are coming from, it could be quite substantial. If I maybe head on a few other questions, I think I'm starting to understand why we're looking at the tile manufacturer for the specification. But, you know, then I really understand how that isn't specified, you know, or the standards no referenced by the architect, or is it? And, you know, how do we get to the stage where we're relying on the manufacturer suggesting you need 2 nails and 2 clips? And when we ordered them, did we end up on a site where we had a multitude of nails and clips left over at the end of it? We need to be questioning why we got these. Chief Exec.
Thanks, convener. If I can just ask Mr. Martin to come in on the first part of your question around the specification, and then perhaps Louise to come in on the second part about the on-site. Neil?
Thanks, convener. Thanks, Greg. So in terms of the standard specification, the information that's provided would relate to the British standard, but also makes reference to the tile manufacturer's recommendations for installation. And as mentioned, addressing Bailey Scott's point, once that's known through the supply procurement process, that's then incorporated into the contract drawings. In terms of the actual detail about the fixing, that is the one point of the BS where we've honed in that it wasn't compliant as was outlined in the report last year. So I think that's why we're then, focusing in on terms of the fixings and details. But they're intrinsically linked in terms of the British standard and any of the manufacturers that would supply roof tiles to the council.
Thanks, Neil.
Louise.
Thanks, Chair. I think what is really clear from the report that went up last year was that trade custom and practice was applied by construction services staff. And what that meant is there wasn't excessive nails, for example, on the sites left over.
So what I think the clips and nails need to be procured. They're going to come with the tile. As much as we're, so the specification really and how they're fixed really lands with us and know the manufacturer, because they only recommend it. It's about you didn't use it to your specification or otherwise, that is it?
Yes, that's correct.
Can I maybe ask some things in general? Obviously, the complaint that was made and the individual suggesting that it took 21 months for us to answer his complaint. I'm wondering how it took that length of time and whether somebody could shed some light on that. Because, given that, and I suppose in that time, did we continue to do roofs incorrectly? Chief Exec.
Thanks, convener. So if I can start off, and then maybe what I'll look to is Louise and Neil to confirm this last part of your question regarding the continuation of roofs and the standard they were delivered to. As you say, the complaint came back to the council, and once that complaint was received, there were obviously officer discussions regarding looking into investigating that, and you can appreciate that that would have taken longer than the 4 weeks, and then not using it as any excuse, but we did hit a global pandemic 3 months after the complaint happening, where the majority of staff either worked from home, or we moved then to really focusing on emergency repairs. And my own conclusion is that that slowed down the progress in the way we dealt with the complaint. Once we were back up and running, we sought to get independent advice so that we could report that back to committee. And once that advice came, we had to digest and understand what that meant. And then when we were able to understand how we would move forward and resolve the problem that a number of roofs weren't to the British standard, that's when we spoke and brought that to committee to seek approval. So there's probably a number of different steps within that, but one of the main reasons for the delay, unfortunately, was the pandemic and just the focus and the different roles that staff had to take. So it's unfortunate that we weren't able to bring this back quicker, but that is predominantly, convener, the main reasons why. I'm happy to take further questions from you on that, but I could see Louise is looking to come in. I don't know if it's to supplement my answer or to go back to the second part of your question that you asked about what we did from the end of 2019 and forward until we reported to committee on the roofs that were done during that time.
Louise.
Thanks, Greg, and thanks, Chair. It was the latter, Greg, and just to clarify, it was set out in the report that went to committee just in November, under section 5.3.1, that when the issue was raised and came to light, all roofs in accordance with the manufacturer's recommendations referring to BS 5534 were then mechanically fixed, the tiles, and the date of that was January 2020.
Good. Another question that
the person that raises the complaint makes quite a number of issues around health and safety and sort of lack of harnesses and hard hats and dust suppression while tiles are being cut. You know, I often think that, you know, when people are questioning that, they're somewhat questioning your how you look as an organisation. And, you know, I'm not sure that that reflects well when people are, you know, everybody's an expert, but, you know, what were we doing about addressing the issues that were raised? I think there's sort of working at height regulations and, you know, no doubt dust suppression comes into health and safety. I mean, it's almost a case of face fit mask, you know, that needs to be in place for someone dealing with dusts, no matter what they are. Elaine?
Thanks, convener. Just to reassure you that construction services do have a dedicated health and safety officer, and I am aware that when those complaints did come in, the health and safety officer did investigate extensively all allegations that were made and found that there was no substantiation to any of them, that health and safety matters were all addressed in accordance with what he would expect to see. So hopefully you can take reassurance that they were fully investigated at the time and the reassurance given back from the health and safety officer.
There were some issues around how the tiles were placed on the roof as well. We have potential for slippage, but I think that was addressed as things moved on, if I recall reading that properly. Okay, is there any further questions? No. Okay, so no further questions, and we've got a report that will be coming forward. I mean, I think the whole episode that we've discussed today has been quite regrettable that we've got here, given that, you know, it's a huge cost to the public of Dundee, and, you know, whatever we can do to prevent that. And, you know, I think some of the measures that we've heard will help that. It'll be good to see these reports coming forward to see how we act more robustly in the future. So with that, I'm going to wish you all a good night. Thank you for your time and patience today. Okay, thanks again. Bye.
Thank you.
Good
night.
Thank you.